Good evening, everyone. I have a few brief comments. We've got a packed agenda, and we're going to hear from our public this evening also. So I just wanted to extend my sympathies to Alicia Casucci and her family and all her friends. I was able to attend the wake this afternoon on behalf of the board, and our first selectman, J.B. Stevenson, was also up there on behalf of the town. So Alicia is very appreciative of all the support, and she's got a beautiful family. So I would ask that we keep her and her family in our prayers. She's done so much for the district and our children over the last year, and so keep her in your thoughts and prayers over the next coming days, months, and weeks, please. Thank you. We had a graduation, a beautiful evening. Thank you to the administration and the high school for a beautiful graduation ceremony. Go Blue Wave, and it was so nice to be in person and see all the students and hear the music and see all the graduates. So well done in terms of our high school graduation. Thank you also to the Board of Finance and RTM subcommittees that we worked with on the appropriation around the funding for a security upgrade that was passed last week. So thank you for that. With that, I will turn it over to Michelle on public comment.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raise hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face, name, and or number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Ms. Allison Johnson, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, I'm unmuted officially? Yes.
Yes, Mrs. Johnson, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Allison Johnson and I live at 573 Middlesex Road. I am one of the co-presidents of DAEG. On behalf of DAEG,
Could you
I would
speak
like
up a little bit?
speak up, sure.
Please. Thank you.
Okay. On behalf of DAEG, I would like to thank Teresa Rangel and the administration for the extremely thorough and thoughtful review of the IDEA program. Thank you to the Board of Ed for requesting this review. The time and resources dedicated to this review are recognized and certainly appreciated. We look forward to hearing the conversation among board members tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
Ms. Teresa Vogt, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, Teresa Vogt, 22 Circle Road. I just wanted to make a quick comment about the school reopening plan and just speak out in favor of the block schedule at DHS. I know Principal Dunn has talked about moving to the block schedule for years, and I think one of the benefits of COVID was giving her that opportunity to move to it. Next year, I think it'll be different in that there will be a lot more collaboration with the students during that long period of time. Obviously, the science labs will come back. But I can say for my own son, who is a rising senior, he found the schedule to be great in that he said it decreased his stress level. Not having a class every day gave him more time to work on his assignments without the pressure of getting the work for 8 classes done in one night, gave him more time to study for tests, more time to take the tests. So I just wanted to speak out in favor of the block schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vogt.
Ms. Andrea J., you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Mrs. J.
Okay. I'm commenting on the reopening plan. I have 2 children who just completed kindergarten and
But
second
we can, Mrs. J, we're going to have specific public discussion on the reopening plan.
Okay,
Can we hold off till then?
sure can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for the questions so far, but this is just public comment around our normal Board of Ed meeting. We do have time on the agenda for a public discussion around the reopening plan. So if we could hold those questions till then, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. Deneen?
Yes, Mrs.
This is
Zuckerman.
a point of order. We can't limit public comment, so we can.
I'm not limiting public comment, so I'm just letting them know they can speak. I hear you, but go ahead.
Ms. Lori Olson, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, my name is Lori Olson and I live at 16 Littlebrook Road North. I am co-chair of the Council of Darien School Parents. The COVID-19 pandemic has been an academic, social, and emotional hardship for many students. We are hearing from parents in the community who feel while we need to continue to remain vigilant, there is hope with our high vaccination rates and low positive COVID cases, we are returning to the 2021-22 school year with some normalcy. We just ended a very extraordinary school year. Prioritizing the safety of our students and staff allowed us to have in-person learning, musicals, concerts, sports, clubs, prom, and many end-of-year celebrations across the district. The end of the school year felt more like pre-pandemic times than any experience in the past 15 months. Now, return to school planning is well underway. We commend the education and administration for involving the community by gathering stakeholder feedback. Parents need to make informed decisions and want to be involved in the process. Continued communication from the administration is crucial and important. Additionally, we urge the administration and Board of Education to work closely with our public health officials and the State Department of Education. Two questions we have. Can mask mandates be lifted indoors at the high school where all students and staff are eligible to receive a COVID-19 vaccine? And number two, fully vaccinated students and staff be exempt from the mask mandate as they are with contact tracing and quarantining? This past school year has not been what any of us planned for. It has challenged us and offered new opportunities every day. It also showed us how flexible and innovative we can be by working together. We can't predict what is going to happen in the fall because COVID is definitely not over, but we can work together, listen to our health experts, and make the most informed decisions we can for our school community. Again, we want to thank our teachers, support staff, administration, and the Board of Education who pool together to support our students and our families and each other. Finally, our condolences to the Casucci family from all Darien school families. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Olson.
Ms. Taylor Carter, you are unmuted.
Sorry, I've got comments on masks and reopening plan. Do you want to wait?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And to Mrs. Ackman's point, this is our normal public comment that we have at a regular board meeting. I want to make sure everyone is heard. We have a specific agenda item, number 7, public discussion on in-person instruction, continuity of service plan, and the school reopening. So if we could hold those comments till then, so we can move forward any other public comment and move to the superintendent report, approval of minutes, and then get into our discussion. I think that would be a good way to go.
Sure.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Michelle?
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay. Thank you all. We'll get to a lot of the conversation shortly. Thank you. Superintendent's report, Dr. Adley.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's a nice celebration for the end of the year. Again, if you would understand that I pass on again our condolences on behalf of the staff to Alicia Casucci. At times, life doesn't seem to make sense sometimes. For the graduation and moving up ceremonies, thank you for everybody who made that possible, from the administration, staff, and our parents. Those were special events for the kids, and I will say that the superintendent enjoyed seeing his first formal graduation here on campus. After 17 years of teaching in Darien, 6 as the DEA president, we offer and extend our congratulations to Jocelyn Delancey on her appointment as vice president of the CEA. This is indeed a wonderful achievement and testament to her work. We are now glad we have a good friend in high places who will continue to advocate for students and teachers, and indeed the Darien Public Schools. We thank Jocelyn for her leadership. wish her well and much success in her new position. On a personal note, I thank her for her professional and personal friendship during the past 2 years as we have navigated together these uncharted COVID waters to deliver an exceptional education experience to all our children. Good luck to Jocelyn. Summer school begins on June 20th. We're ready to go. There'll be another communication going out tomorrow about summer school. The board chair talked about the Board of Finance approval of the funds for the capital project. We have a purchase order. Meetings are underway for the work to commence in the summer for our new security system. Last night, the Board of Selectmen talked about establishing one building committee. They will take a vote at their next meeting. I think their next meeting is July 10th, but they put off the vote to the next meeting. The administrative retreat actually starts tomorrow. It is planned for tomorrow, and topics include primarily strategic planning. That sort of follows the strategic plan that we have. So how does that take place at the school level? We certainly have orientation experiences for principals and assistant principals, and we'll be looking at ruler and equity training. And I would just take this opportunity to thank both the board, but also our community for all of their assistance this year, and we wish them a happy and a safe summer.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. We'll move to approval of minutes. It is requested that the board approve the following: minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on May 25th, 2021, minutes of the regular meeting held on May 25th, 2021, and minutes of the special meeting held on June 3rd, 2021. May I have a motion? Mrs. Parent, second by Mr. Maroney. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Board, committee, and reports. Okay, moving on. Okay, thank you all for your patience. We are now move towards the public discussion on the in-personal instructional and continuity service plan, the reopening of schools. All right. Anything you wanted to add, Dr. Adler?
Yes, just for process-wise from the board, a week ago, last Friday, we sent out information to the community about this. This is being continued to be discussed. We discussed prior also about this was being discussed at various board meetings. We said to them that we would post the actual plan on Wednesday, which we did, and then we communicated accordingly again to the community to encourage them to go on Wednesday and look at the site between now and actually they can continue to provide feedback actually. So it'll be an ongoing thing, even throughout the summer to some degree. We can still receive feedback. We've received, I think, just over 300 comments or so. So we appreciate those members of the community who have responded in kind. The safe return to in-person instruction is as posted on the website. We posted it last week, as I said. It's technically required to be posted by tomorrow, so we're well ahead of the schedule and posting it. If there are changes to be made, these changes will be rolling throughout the summer, so it will stay in that location and be amended, and we'll update the community as necessary. So with the board's understanding, I'm not going to go through the whole plan. I think people have a good sense of it. Hopefully, if you don't, you certainly can comment. I tried to include things that were brought up at the last meeting, including things like, do we have visitors? How are we going to address those types of things, food, transportation? So it doesn't say what's left out. It sort of says what's in. It's more concise just because we're getting back to normal as much as possible. And we're using essentially the board's, the state's template. It's not a requirement to use it, but we are using it. It served the purpose to do that. So unless the board would like me to talk further at it, I have addressed this at different meetings, and the actual plan itself now has been presented before the community and the board, and I'll leave it for discussion.
So Dr. Adley, could you just confirm, because I think it just reinforces, and we'll get all the great feedback that we want from the community, but the mandates that we're under at the state level, and how that works, and the dates with which some of this stuff is expiring at the state level. And so expiring doesn't mean it's not going to be continued.
So the biggest concern that I have heard, I mean, actually just even today, just coming through or some are just a request for not to have mask. And I think that was the largest sort of feedback that we had actually from the survey. And I won't forget your question, Mr. Chairman, but it sort of addresses it, that about 200 of the people who responded wanted no restrictions. About 19 of them wanted restrictions, and there's about 20 or so, 16 to 20 of continue to support SEL. Those were the main sort of feedbacks as of today, as of right now. But the idea of the mask, essentially, we are under a state requirement from the State Department of Public Health, from the State Department of Education, to require mask wearing in schools. That was, and the executive order is technically a state law, and that will be in effect. These things are hard to track, by the way, and they keep your head around which is the date for these things. But so it's my understanding that will go through July 20th. But after that, they're likely to, or before that, likely to issue new regulations. All the meetings that we have been on every week have been that you must wear masks for summer school. You must wear masks for the start of the school year until you hear differently.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that update, Dr. Adley. And I appreciate all the feedback that's come into individual board members, that's come into the district. I think there's folks out in the community that are sending letters to our legislative leaders, going over their thoughts around this. So I think all the feedback is important, not just to the board and the administration, but at the state level also. So it's appreciated. Dr. Adley.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this is an appropriate time, but I do have Dr. Kennefick is on here. So if you need to have a discussion with him, I don't see him there. Dr. Kennefick, are you online?
I am here.
Great. Dr. Kennefick, thank you for joining us this evening. As we hear from the public, if there are any questions out there or anything that you can add, we'll look to you. Thank you. So with that, Michelle, we'll open it up to the public discussion.
There are no raised hands at this time. Would you, oh, we have one.
Yeah.
Ms. Lily Worm, you are unmuted and recognized.
Can you just, Michelle, the same protocol in terms of them speaking their address?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Hi, it's Tara Worm. I live at 17 Mystic Lane. Good evening, Dr. Adley, Chairman Deneen, and the entire Board of Education. I'll be brief, as I expect many will want to speak this evening. Thank you for giving the community a chance to voice our opinions and concerns on this very important topic of our students returning to school. I realize that masks are still mandated in the school by executive order. I urge you, as the administration and Board of Education, to send a clear message to Governor Lamont that local decisions should be made by our own local government based on our local public health data. It is time to unmask our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Worm.
Ms. Taylor Carter, you are unmuted and recognized.
Thank you for waiting, Taylor. Can you hear us? You look like you're still muted. Okay,
Sorry,
good.
I think, you got me now?
Yes.
All right, Taylor Carter, 385 Middlesex Road. First, thank you all for your stated intention of returning to school this fall in as normal a fashion as possible. We all recognize today that health is more than just the physical. It is emotional and psychological as well. Your commitment to helping our staff and students move beyond this pandemic and toward a holistic vision of health is greatly appreciated. I am frustrated, however, that the state wants to stand in the way of this goal with their mask mandate, and I ask you to please advocate vehemently for this removal. Masks are not healthy for children. They impair their ability to breathe, communicate, and socialize. They promote fear and helplessness. They collect germs, and their efficacy at preventing the spread of coronavirus is questionable at best. Regarding the back to school plan on which you have sought our feedback, I have 3 comments. 1, the first line of the high school plan reads, in order to minimize the number of individuals each student and teacher comes into contact with each day, Darien High School will operate on a block schedule. Why are we intentionally minimizing personal interactions? Our high school students and staff have been given ample time and opportunity to become vaccinated. We have no legitimate reason to be concerned with mass quarantines. Is the block schedule the best model for learning? If not, I would suggest this is not normal and not necessary. 2, in the elementary plan, you state that relationship building is the foundation to a successful start of the school year. I fully agree and want to reiterate the importance of mask removal in achieving that goal. 3, later in the elementary plan, it says time will be spent discussing teachers and students' experiences and feelings, and that specific lessons designed to teach healthy hygiene practices and physical social distancing protocols will be embedded in the schedule. While I recognize the very real social impact the pandemic has had on our children, I hope you will prioritize the remediation of educational losses our children have suffered over the last 15 months. Further, instruction in hygiene and social distancing practices seems a waste of precious classroom time at this writing, and I hope it will be reconsidered in favor of real academic recovery. Finally, thank you for engaging us, the parents, in refining this thoughtful plan, and I look forward to a successful return to school this fall. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter.
Miss Andrea J., you are unmuted and recognized.
Thank you, Andrea, for waiting.
No problem. My name's Andrea Gerasi. I live at 5 Old Parish Road. I have 2 children who just completed kindergarten and 2nd grade, and I'm speaking tonight to express my extreme frustration that the mask mandate and all of your other so-called safety protocols will remain in place for next year. In case you have not heard about it, there was a group of parents in Florida who sent in their children's masks to a lab for analysis. Here are some of what was found on them: bacteria that causes pneumonia, tuberculosis, meningitis, sepsis, E. coli, Legionnaire's disease, the list goes on. The face masks studied were new or freshly laundered before wearing and had been worn for 5 to 8 hours, most during in-person schooling by children ages 6 through 11. What amazes me most is that you all just sit there and act like you are protecting our children when in fact you are harming them by depriving them of breathing fresh air. Let that sink in. You're depriving our children of breathing fresh air. And I'm sick of hearing the excuse that we can't unmask our kids because it's a state mandate. Yeah, I get that. But then how come numerous school boards in New York and across the country have stood up against this tyranny and they've unmasked the school children? I happen to know of a school district who never masked their kids all year and they had no issues, but you don't hear that in the news. You don't care that children don't get sick from this virus. You simply follow suit to comply with the government in order to receive your state money. It's child abuse, period. That's the way I see it. Perhaps the parents of Darien will rise up like they did in Vail, Arizona, and overthrow our Board of Education. It's time someone stands up for our children. So as long as you continue with the mask mandate, my children will not be attending Darien schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gerasi.
Ms. Teresa Vogt, you are unmuted and recognized.
Can you hear us, Mrs. Vogt?
Ms. Vogt, you are still.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Sorry. I needed to hide my camera this time. Teresa Vogt, 22 Circle Road. I'm just going to repeat what I said before, since I do have a child at the high school and a rising senior at that, and a child who's lived through the block schedule and a typical schedule at the high school. And I just want to reiterate that the block schedule is a blessing at the high school. These kids not having 8 classes a day with huge work assignments every day due the next day relieves a lot of stress for them. I asked my son, he prefers the block schedule. He said almost every kid in every one of his classes prefers the block schedule. So I do want to speak out in favor of that. As for masks, obviously, I'm one of those people. I will do what is best and safe for everybody in the district. If that means wearing masks, I'm in favor of it, even though I have a vaccinated child. I did find that this year, fewer people got sick. I wasn't in my pediatrician's office with him this year. I know so many people who did not get strep throat this year, who did not get the flu this year. I think I'm just going to keep masks in my car all the time. So I just wanted to speak out in favor of doing whatever the health experts think is best for our kids.
Thank you, Mrs. Vogt.
Mr. Greg Bradley, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hold on, Michelle, could I hold on just a second? May I ask who's just come into the room? No. No. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, unfortunately, we're going to have to ask you to leave the room. So it's strictly by Zoom, which is how it went, how the meeting notification went out for the public. All right?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
It's all
I
right.
apologize for that. Go ahead, Michelle.
Mr. Greg Grambling, you are unmuted and recognized.
It's Greg Grambling from 11 Blueberry Lane. I was also surprised to read the updated return to school plan, which seems to have very little to nothing changed from this past school year. It is surprising because a lot has changed. Kids don't have to wear masks or social distance in grocery stores, movie theaters, retail shops, while playing sports, summer camps, or elsewhere. So, reading through it, I was kind of thinking, why still in schools? I would equally like to express my support for a completely normal return to school. So no more requirements for masks, no more social distancing, no more barriers between our children in classrooms, no more unproductive half-day Fridays. The parents of Darien public school students have the Board of Ed and administration's backs to proactively speak out to the state to allow for us to make local decisions that are made based on science and common sense rather than what seems to be outdated executive orders from 18 months ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grambling.
Ms. Claudia, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Your name, your full name and address, please. Thank you.
Claudia Ebert, 1 Cherry Lane, Darien. Dr. Adley and members of the Darien Board of Education, thank you for your time tonight and for leading our schools during the last 2 years throughout COVID-19. I realize it's difficult to balance everyone's safety needs and wants between all the staff, teachers, parents, and children. I'm a mother of 4 children. My 3 older children attend Oxridge Elementary School. This past year, I had 1 in kindergarten, 1 in 1st grade, and 1 in 2nd grade. My son Grant is in kindergarten, David in 1st, daughter Helena is in 2nd. I'm extremely grateful that they were able to attend school in person this year, even with masks. However, I strongly believe that the time has come to lift the mask mandate on our children in our schools, and I vehemently oppose masking our children any longer. While the pandemic and contagion of COVID-19 was an issue earlier in the year, there is no longer any data that supports the need to mask our children, who are the least affected individuals of this virus, especially given that teachers and school staff in Darien who wish to be vaccinated are vaccinated. The detrimental effect of masking on the emotional, social, and educational well-being of our youngest children is unquestionable. The struggle of a kindergartner to learn to read when he cannot see the lips moving on his teacher as letter sounds are enunciated, his inability to sense emotion in his teacher or his peers because of half of their face is covered, and the discomfort of a 5, 6, or 7-year-old having to cover the area where he breathes for 6 hours a day while trying to learn new concepts every day cannot be denied, and this must not be allowed to continue. These poor kids have to wear a mask even during physical education, which to me is an outrage. I'm torn every morning when I send my children off to school and tell them that they need to put on their mask, especially Grant, my kindergartner. Grant chews on his mask, he sucks on it, he brings it down from his nose, and he needed to constantly be corrected throughout his day by his teachers about his mask. Yet he's doing nothing wrong. This is wrong. He is only reacting to the unnaturalness of having to cover his face and his mouth and his nose. He's reacting to his inability to process having to cover half of his face while he breathes and is asked to concentrate and perform school tasks throughout the day, making our youngest children feel guilty or different because they are uncomfortable wearing a mask is wrong. The World Health Organization advises that children aged 5 years and under should not be required to wear masks. This is based on the safety and overall interest of the child and the capacity to appropriately use a mask with minimal assistance. Grant is 5 years old until August of this year. The WHO advises that the decision to use masks for children aged 6 to 11 should be based on certain factors, including whether there's widespread transmission in the area where the child resides, the ability of the child to safely and appropriately use a mask.
You're almost out of time.
These masks cover our children's mouths and noses. They hinder their ability to breathe. To say that this is normal or should become normal or is the new normal is nothing other than asking all of us to accept the absurd. I'd ask that you unmask our children in the fall. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak tonight, and I thank you again for this service and to the community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Stacy TA, you are unmuted and recognized.
Good evening. My name is Stacy Tia. I live at 10 Clocks Lane. I just want to echo Ms. Boat's comments. I already sent a letter into the board, so I'll be brief. I think it's important to listen to the health officials, and I think the children are fine with masks. We've had no problems. We typically would have 4 cases of strep at least in a year, and I did not have 1 case of strep in my home. So I think, that's all. I just wanted to echo Mrs. Boat's comments.
Thank you, Mrs. TA.
Ms. Christine Wojtman, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm at 4 Stanton Road. My husband and I are against mandatory masking and COVID-19 vaccination policies for school attendance. We can debate the effectiveness of masks to prevent the transmission of SARS-CoV-2, but what is not debatable is that the statistics with respect to children and COVID-19 disease are crystal clear. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is no more dangerous to children than the flu. And one of the unique things about SARS-CoV-2 is that children appear to be particularly resistant to severe disease. Arguably, the annual flu is more dangerous to children than SARS-CoV-2 virus. Additionally, all adults working in schools have had the opportunity to be vaccinated. To quote Governor Andrew Cuomo, if you get a vaccine, you don't have to worry about unvaccinated people. If adults are protected by vaccines, why do we continue to require children to protect them? There are no justifications at this point for mandatory masking. If parents are concerned about their children catching the SARS-CoV-2 virus from other children, then they have the option to mask their children or have their children vaccinated if they are eligible or when the vaccines are approved for children under 12. One of the major concerns with masking is that that's rarely discussed, is the safety of long-term mask wearing by children for extended periods of time. There is a reason that OSHA and NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, exist. Use of face masks in the workplace is highly regulated because there are risks associated with mask wearing. Who is overseeing the use of face masks by children in schools to ensure that our children are safe? Has OSHA evaluated the school for ventilation and airflow? Have PPE professionals assessed each individual child to ensure they are able to physically withstand wearing masks for 6 to 8 hours per day? Has this risk-benefit analysis ever been done? I know how I feel after wearing a mask for 2 hours while grocery shopping. I can't imagine how children feel after 6 hours of school a day wearing a face covering. My children are they are unable to advocate for themselves. They are unaware that the fatigue, shortness of breath, headache, anxiety, and other symptoms they're experiencing are likely caused by mask wearing. They're not old enough to make the connection and too afraid to ask for a breathing break. That term says it all. It's appalling that a human being, particularly a child, should have to request a breathing break. Why are we making the most vulnerable members of our society, our children, make sacrifices that many of us don't have to make as we sit at home or in our offices mask-free? What are we doing to our children, both physically and psychologically? Face masks should not function as a placeholder for vaccination. Holding children's
almost that time.
Yep, I'm almost done. Breathing hostage until children are vaccinated, when and if the vaccines are approved for children under 12, is coercion. What happens if vaccines aren't approved for children under 12 for another year or 2 or 3? What if they are never approved for children under 12?
Thank you. You reached your time. Thank you. Michelle?
Hanson, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, my name is Avery Hanson, and I live on 46 Herman Avenue, and I would like to comment on the mask wearing at schools for the fall. This past year has been a very tough year to adjust to wearing a mask. I had trouble communicating with my teachers because 1, I couldn't understand what they were saying through the mask. 2, I couldn't read the emotion on their faces. The worst part was that I couldn't communicate with the other students, not my cohort, because we were only allowed to be in one room majority of the day. I also barely knew what the kids in my class faces looked like because masks were always covering them. We were also told that wearing masks and social distancing is keeping us safe and healthy, but in reality, COVID for us kids is like the flu, and not being able to socialize is worse than this virus. Please take this into consideration to not wear masks next fall. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for speaking. Thank you.
Nicholas Lalage, you're unmuted and recognized.
Hi, yes, Nicholas Lalage. I live on 147 Holmes Avenue. We have 3 kids, 2 in elementary school and 1 in middle school. I didn't see in the back to school plan anything that talks about the before school programs. So my first question is, are you planning to reinstate these before school programs? And secondly, are you also planning to reinstate the 50 minutes recess for the kids before the school? So would appreciate it if you have any comments on this, Dr. Adley. Thank you.
I can, yes. Thank you for your question, sir. You bring up an issue that has not been delineated in the plan. I will circle back, but my intent would be, or our intent would be, that we would go forward with a regular program before school programs.
Meaning both recess, the 50 minutes recess before school with attendance of one of the teacher on the ground, plus the preschool program such as extra math or chess or yoga. Is that correct?
Essentially, that's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lalage.
Ms. Teresa Vogt, I am not sure if you did it lower your hand before or have any questions, but you are unmuted and recognized.
You guys don't need to hear from me anymore. I didn't raise my hand. Sorry.
Ms. Jessica Levy, do you have another question? Your hand is still raised.
You're on mute, Ms.
Sorry. I just wanted to
Can you just state your name and address, Mrs. Levy? You're on mute again.
Sorry. Jessica Levy, live at 40 Pasture Lane in Darien. I wanted to start by thanking you all for taking the time to listen to the public and all the thought and time you've put into keeping our children and our teachers safe. I currently have a son who attends Hindley Elementary School, and I have one in preschool, and I'm expecting a child in September. The children in our elementary schools, as everyone knows, are unable to be vaccinated or make that choice for themselves. And while I understand people's right to choose to vaccinate or not, I believe the only way to keep our children safe and our community safe is to ask the children to wear masks at school. While all adults have had the opportunity to be vaccinated, many have elected not to participate. It's my understanding that the only people who are allowed to go mask-free are people who have been vaccinated. And while our children remain unable to be vaccinated, I think the safest choice for them would be to wear masks while inside at school. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Levy.
Jamie Zionic, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, Jamie Zanuck, 15 Holmes Court. Dr. Adley, I'm just commenting, I'm hoping you can share the conversation we had earlier today about whether a travel quarantine is required during ESY. Thank you.
So the question that was asked by Mrs. Zionic was, if people are traveling, what is the requirement or guideline? It's currently what it is right now. It's a guideline to follow CDC recommendations, which are to quarantine when you come back for the 7 days. But that is not a requirement. That's the same as whenever we had the last vacation. It's not a requirement to do that. We're encouraging people to do that, but it's not a requirement that they do it.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. Thank you, Mrs. Zionic.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Thank you all for your ongoing feedback and comments and support of our children. We appreciate it. Continue to please provide the board or the administration with your feedback. Continue to provide that feedback to our legislative leaders and at the state level to the governor. The board appreciates the ability to listen to you this evening. We see you and we're around all of you throughout town all day long, so we appreciate all the feedback and the concerns and the conversation around this. The board will continue to work with Dr. Adley, who works with all the superintendents at the state level to continue to monitor this. And the board will come together and talk about next steps in terms of the board, also commenting in terms of the general consensus of the board around masks and no masks. Dr. Adley, anything else you want to add?
If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Kennefic is here. I wouldn't.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I want to recognize
Great.
all his hard work throughout the year with the team, and he's heard the comments. And Dr. Kennefic, maybe you have some comments back about the mask or otherwise.
That's perfect. Thank you, Dr. Kennefic. Thank you for holding on and listening.
Sure. Are there any questions from the board to start?
Great. Thank you. Mr. Cini.
Dr. Kennefic, thanks again for being with us tonight. Maybe you could talk about the data within Darien right now. You know, we've the prevalence of the virus in recent weeks, based on the reports through June 10th, were minimal. And I'm struggling. One, I mean, why we as adults are wearing masks in this room, and I know it's for solidarity's sake and the fact that our kids and our teachers do, but you know, help us understand from a medical standpoint the prevalence and what the spread rates may be in Darien right now, and that would be helpful.
Oh, certainly. The data for the last few weeks has been very positive. I mean, good. I guess positive is a different meaning in the setting of a pandemic, but we've had very few cases. I think we had one positive so far this week. And throughout all of Fairfield County, in fact, most of Connecticut, or even most of New England and New York, infection rates are very low and test positivity rates are hovering at 1% or low. So currently, we're seeing very little disease activity in most of New England, which is good. We're hoping that for the second season of the pandemic, that we will see a seasonal influence, meaning most coronaviruses are seasonal, that we see more illnesses in the winter. We didn't see that this year or this past year because there were just too many hosts available. But if you look at the curve over time, you could see there was a lull in the summer, and then come winter, the virus came back. What we don't know is what the situation will be in the fall and winter. We're hoping it'll be much, much better. But there probably will be sporadic cases because no vaccine is 100% effective and no population is 100% vaccinated. But the summer and probably into the fall, I would expect to see very little disease activity in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Hi, Dr. Kennefic. Just a couple follow-ups to Mr. Cini's question asking about data.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the trends you just mentioned, the high and the low, you know, we obviously had a spike over the winter before the vaccine, but there was pretty prevalent mask wearing then. So I'm just curious as to the correlation between mask wearing and blocking the virus, or does it seem that distribution of the vaccine seems to be having a higher impact and probably a closer tie-in into what's reduced some of the cases here other than just seasonality? The other question I would have is, and this has come up, you know, from parents, has come in public comment. There's been some anecdotal discussion from Dr. Fauci that, you know, masks don't really do anything anyway because of the particulate size of the virus. Has anyone actually done anything, you know, a study and come up with actual data on that, or is that just still anecdotal at this point?
Well, let me take the first question first. In terms of the reason for, I guess in terms of the low observed case rates, it depends where we're talking about. In the general community, probably vaccination has had a profound effect. In the schools, we observed very low activity throughout the school year. And in fact, there was very little transmission of COVID within the schools. The vast majority of cases we saw were from community activities, family activities, and youth sports. So most of the kids who acquired COVID did so outside of the school system, so that the mitigation strategies that were in effect in the schools, and not just in our district, but probably nationwide, were incredibly effective at reducing the spread of not just COVID, but you heard a couple parents say, I can tell you as a pediatrician in practice for 30 years, I have never seen the pediatric population this healthy. Not only did we prevent a lot of COVID, we prevented, as you heard from some other parents, a lot of strep. I did not see a single case of influenza, and I can't say that for the last 30 years of practice. That clearly the mitigation strategies of which masking was a part were incredibly effective in preventing disease in our school-based population. If you want to know if mitigation strategies are effective, ask any pediatrician. Business has been unbelievably slow. It's beginning to rise now because what we're seeing is adults are relaxing, their social distancing and masking strategies. So now for the first time in the last 3 weeks, we've seen a significant rise in febrile illnesses and respiratory illnesses in young children, probably because of the relaxation, the mitigation strategies in the community. I do want to correct one misconception that I heard in the comments. COVID is actually significantly more dangerous to children than influenza is. Particularly this year, we had one influenza death, I think, reported in the United States this year. In children, typically it's in the 150 to 200. 200's a bad year for influenza in terms of pediatric deaths. COVID's already killed between 300 and 400 children in the United States. And it actually it's killed more kids than most of the vaccine preventable diseases that we have. In terms of data on masking, it's getting better, but the anecdotal reports are pretty impressive because we've seen in those communities that had good mitigation strategies, the schools reported very low rates of COVID transmission, whereas out in the community, the rates were often much higher. So I don't know if that addresses your questions.
Yeah, I just, you started earlier, just in your response to the first, mentioning that it's a difference between what we see in schools and what we see in communities. So I guess it's a little difficult not to conflate, but just as a general trend, if you look outside of schools for a moment, you look at just the general population and look, say, in town at Darien specifically. If you look over the long run over the past 2 years or 18 months, whatever it's been exactly with COVID and the masking, does it really seem like there's a sync between masking in the general population and rates, or does it seem like vaccination has had the greater impact in the trend line?
I would say that, well, the problem with masking is it's hard to separate it out from the other mitigation strategies like social distancing and cutting back on group activities. But that, if you take the suite of mitigation strategies, I think there's very little doubt that they had a profound impact on slowing the transmission of the disease. And the places where mitigation strategies were most consistently in effect in the United States were schools for the most part, particularly in New England. And again, we saw very, very little transmission within schools, but we saw a fair amount of transmission in the community. So community activities, family activities, despite whatever mitigation strategies they were observing, we had some breakthrough cases, but probably nowhere near what we would have seen. If you look at other nations that weren't able to have mitigation strategies because of the nature of the population, they had significantly more struggles. So I think it's quite clear that the mitigation strategies are quite effective in preventing disease. But it's a community discussion as to whether it's worth it.
But your point that we've seen it come from the community more, and I guess that's kind of partially what's making me question this, is we're going to have students interacting with the community going forward. That's not going to change. So as that happens, our masks don't seem to be stopping it in the community. It seems that the vaccinations in the community has been where the trend line has changed. And we're going to have that interaction still. The kids are not just going to be in a bubble in the school. So I understand that we may have seen some bifurcation there, but I don't understand how that actually plays out going forward.
Sorry, was that a question?
I think so.
Okay. I'm sorry. Well, It depends. I mean, we're still, obviously waiting for the state and for other authorities to, give us some opinions. But of course, keep in mind that vaccination had a profound effect, and masking wasn't really discontinued until people were vaccinated. So one is a continuation of the other, as opposed, or maybe a replacement. Bear in mind, though, vaccination is far from 100% effective. Even if it's 95% effective, 5% of 300 million people is a lot of people. And in people with immune issues, the vaccine may not be effective at all. So it really, it depends on what the case rates are in the community. It's possible that the state or CDC may find, as they look over data, that leaving some mitigation strategies in place may reduce or alter the guidelines for quarantine and excluding kids from school. And I mean, I think our goal has always been to keep as many kids in school as much as possible. And if that in fact is some of their recommendations, we'd have to look closely at that if it would, keep more kids in school. I mean, I think that's the goal, is first to keep everybody safe. And I think the school system did a very good job of keeping both the students and faculty safe. And then is to keep the kids in school, as if it's safe, as much as possible, because it's so important for the kids to be in school. Now, some experts would say close everything else in town if there's a viral spike, but leave the schools open. But that's not what the United States, chose. So, every community has to balance what's, most important. And it's always going to be a risk benefit, analysis. Right. The problem with the pandemic is, we're learning as we go.
One quick, and then I'll let you go to other board members. But first, thank you for all your efforts throughout. You mentioned the community, and you mentioned the 300 million in the States and the 95% population. But really, we're focused on Darien for the most part. And so I would think, in terms of looking at data here, looking at data in town, just where the benchmarks are now, does that really indicate that we're at a higher risk? Because I think you mentioned New England and all seems to be on a big downturn, correct?
Yes, and I think right now the risk is relatively low in the community. It'll probably go up as we get into the winter months. And it's all a question, we kept schools open at community rates that everyone said should have shut down school systems everywhere, but the school systems stayed open because we weren't seeing transmission in the schools. And so we were able to keep the schools open when many other parts of the United States, following, guidelines from the CDC were going on hybrid or remote. But the data here was very good. Now, that was probably due to our mitigation strategies. How that looks without mitigation strategies, I can't tell you, and no one can tell you. We can only tell you if we perform the experiment. We'll see what the recommendations are as we get toward the fall.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Achman.
Hi, Dr. Kenevic. I think I have two quick questions. One, you just confirm you are a licensed medical professional who's been a practicing pediatrician for 30 years, yes?
That's correct. Slightly over 30, unfortunately.
And is there anything in your professional opinion that any one of us 9 board members has done in terms of enacting COVID policies that would rise to the level of a credible charge of child abuse?
Well, I couldn't speak to your personal lives, but as board members, no, not at all. I actually think that everyone in the Darien school community did really an outstanding job of trying to really do our very best to keep the kids in school as much as possible and the schools open in very, very difficult circumstances, in situations that were, evolving every day. So I think the school system actually did a great job in very difficult circumstances in often unknown territory. So that would be my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Achman. Thank you, Dr. Kenevic. Any other board questions or comments? Good. All right. Dr. Kenevic, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, and I will let you go.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you,
Dr.
Appreciate it. We will continue to move on.
Wait, I'm sorry, Duke. I held back some questions for the administration on this topic, or do you
Say that again, John?
I held back on the question for Dr.
Sure.
Adley. Yeah.
Oh, yep.
So I guess the question has come up, from a local level, if we were to disobey the state mandate, what the ramifications would be. And whether or not you've explored that, whether either our attorneys or the authorities.
So I would not recommend the board go against the recommendations of our medical advisors. As frustrating as it is, as a layperson myself, I have my own opinions and concerns and so on about disconnects, but in no way could I myself, nor would I recommend that the board go against the State Department of Education or the State Department of Public Health or our local advisors in many ways. I don't have the latitude to do that. I'm not a doctor in that capacity. I'm not an epidemiologist. I have no authority or reason to guide you in that way other than what you're observing yourself. People in the community. But I would not be recommending that. And well, I think that's what you're looking for. I think.
Yeah. Well, in the ramifications, if we did choose.
Well, the ramifications. I don't know what the ramifications are, but potentially this is certainly very closely tied to the American Rescue Act, right? I would speculate that certainly the financial aspect of that may be impacted, if not other things. It would remain to be determined what action would be taken. We heard some things online about other school districts going against the mask and so on. Well, they quickly had to reverse
Exactly.
when the CDC came in. So I understand people's perceptions from a slight distance, but I'm not recommending actually that the board go against those recommendations.
Would you mind just sharing some insights in your conversations with the authorities and other school districts that, in the meetings that you have with superintendents and those authorities from the state?
I think our concerns have been many of what have been articulated around here and probably around dinner tables around our Darien community, in the sense of our youngest kids. We've got kids in the high school who've been vaccinated, so why can't we make some mitigation in there or navigate something? Perhaps even if a student contracts COVID, well, we're not sending out 7 people or 6 people, or we're sending someone home as just for that particular case per se. Can they mitigate it in some ways? And then the idea that everybody else is going out in the community and from having dinners to everything else in between, and yet they're holding the schools up to this higher standard. I just have to trust that they have reasons for doing that. But most superintendents would have that disposition of, can we loosen these restrictions in some capacity, particularly around quarantine? And I would say, if they can't just get rid of the mask, can we have some relaxation around quarantine where perhaps those who contracted the virus actually stay out themselves, and we don't have this let a whole class out and so on and so forth. So those are some reasonable steps that we're trying to advocate for. But I'll just tell you that the State Department of Public Health and Department of Education are extremely slow moving. I don't get the impression, and I could be wrong, that they're really advocating these other things to who they're answerable to, the CDC and so on. But they're awaiting guidance, it seems to me, and that's, well, I get a sense that they're awaiting guidance. And so those are some of the things that superintendents are advocating for.
I really appreciate that. And I do, just as a board, given the comments that we're hearing this evening, I mean, would it make sense for us to communicate a view or a vision or a desire to, modify some of these mandates and communicate that to the state authorities as a board?
Yeah, thank you for the question, John. What I just wanted one follow-up to Dr. Adley. So are there mechanisms where the superintendents are pushing up or asking for relief and working with any of the organizations like CABE or any of those organizations that are pushing? And at what point in time, I mean, I think communities are now starting to push more their feelings around this.
So Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents are advocating at least to look at, is there a way? I think that they're not necessarily advocating no mask because not everybody in every community feels the way some people feel in our community. In fact, it's not a consistent for every person who's sending me an email about don't take off the mask. I won't say it's 1-to-1, but there's enough people who think that, well, wait a minute, can we follow the guidelines until we hear differently. So the superintendent organization is pushing for some sort of mitigation in the process. And we collectively and our local superintendent group meet with the executive director of KEPS and also the State Department every week to talk about where are we. These are the things we're asking for. It's not as if it's not as if they're not hearing us. Whether they can react or will react is a whole different discussion.
Okay, thank you. Now to your, Mr. Brown. No, I just wanted to respond to Mr. Sini and say if we want a consensus of the board that we want to collectively put our thoughts together in terms of how we feel or what we want to say to the state in terms of looking at the science, looking at the rates, looking at the mitigation, look at what we've done and communicate that up to the state level, then I'd like a consensus of the board if we want to do that and we can craft something along those lines that everyone's on board with. So I'll open it up for any conversation around that. Mrs. Parent.
I mean, I just heard our medical professional say that he thought that the masks were appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I agree that unmasking children is the ultimate goal, but until our medical professionals say that that's appropriate, I don't know that I'm comfortable doing that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brown.
I think it's a great idea. I'd be happy to pursue that as a board. And the only other thought we might want to consider including in that is the idea of local control and that local data should be considered.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Sini?
Yeah, I would follow up. I mean, yes, our local professionals have said, we want to follow the mandates, but our local data, it's clear. There's no spread at this point.
I agree.
0.833.
Yeah.
So if we could urge as a board that with our local professional guidance, and look at the data and with their guidance and remove the mandate, that's what I would advocate for. This is not, blind, let's remove the masks, despite what our local authorities are saying. It's as time goes on, I think with such low prevalence, like what are we protecting the kids from at this point?
Mm-hmm.
What are we protecting ourselves from in this room at this point? So I'll leave it there. Sorry.
Okay. Mr. Brown.
I did have a quick before, if we're moving back off of the question of communication. I had a follow-up from before, if I can go to that. Are we doing
Sure.
communications now? I wasn't sure where we are in the conversation, so if now's a good time, I'll be happy to ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
Looks like a good time, okay. Dr. Adley, for you, quick hypo, I apologize, but we've had.
Quick typo?
Hypo,
Oh,
hypothetical. Don't mean to put you on the spot. What you mentioned in the survey, I think it was 22 parents who said that we shouldn't remove the masks. And I guess my question from that is, if we get to a point where we do remove the mask and parents still want to send their kid in a mask, do you envision that we're going to penalize them for doing that, or would that be allowed?
It would be the same as it is this year until students who are in school, students who are coming to school right now, we just finished, but students for this year had to come with a mask.
No, I guess, so let's say we're in the future.
Yes.
There's no mask required at all.
Correct. Okay.
Goes away, state goes away,
Okay.
CDC, we say it's all gone.
Yeah.
But there's a parent who says, you know what, I want my kid to wear a mask. Are we going to penalize that child?
I would see no reason why we would.
Thank you.
I
Next
would
question.
anticipate that now.
I would say though, I would say.
Policies regarding face coverings. We'd have to check.
Right. So I think would be clearly would be reasonable if people felt for whatever reason that, look, I'm still anxious about it. In fact, I think we are probably going to get that. I don't think you have to look too far beyond our borders and so on to see the ramifications of that. And I think that's something to expect. And I would expect us to be reasonable with that request.
Okay. The next question I had is, you had mentioned in the opening, and I apologize, I missed it. I thought you said July 26th was the date. We may get some further information.
Yeah.
I guess my question, are there milestones that you're looking to for when things could change for moving ahead? What are those milestones and what are the dates? If you could just give us that data or that information, that'd be great.
The milestone for the mask is by the 20th, July 20th.
Okay.
But the state has to come, what their milestones are, that's just a milestone and a date. They'll come back out and tell us something, but they've already told us summer school and the start of school, you're going to have to wear masks unless something happens before then. So
okay.
Honestly, Mr. Brown, I'm not sure what their milestones that That's part of the issue here. I'm not sure what the metric is and what the milestones is and what the influence is going to be.
Got it. Yeah, I just didn't know if there was, say August 1st, we're going to hear something or but there's nothing like that. It's just the July 20th date at this time is what we have to anticipate.
Yep, that's correct.
Thank you.
Can we finish our conversation about a communication from the board? I think Mr. Sini's on board with it. Mr. Brown, Mrs. Ackman, thoughts? Not looking for commitments, just thoughts.
I don't know what we're communicating. That's my trouble with giving a thought.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
would
I think
need-
the
I don't need a draft. I need to know what's the message we're communicating. Representing that we have parents who feel strongly is one thing. Representing that we have any medical know-how is something I would be against. So I would need to know, or need this group to come up with what the message is, because I am not going to pretend to be a doctor.
No, I don't.
And then I could offer an opinion.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I
what's
don't
our
disagree.
message?
I don't disagree with you. I'm looking for if the board wants to work together to come up with some type of communication that we're all comfortable with based on our feelings and our thoughts as a community and what we see as a community and what we know from our medical professionals. If you're on board with looking at drafting a communication.
So I think the drafting is kind of the logistics of it, but what's the broad picture of what we as a board are willing to say? And until I know that, and I don't mean the nitty gritty, right? I agree, we
Right.
have to draft into that, but what message are we trying to send the state? If the message is as blunt as unmask our kids, I don't think the 9 of us have the expertise to do that.
I
If
agree.
the message is something else about what we're hearing, community concerns, we may be able to do that. But until maybe now's the time, we
Yeah.
talk about what's the broad message we're sending to the state. I don't know how to give you my consensus.
No, understood. I appreciate that. And I think I'm happy to listen to what people at the board table right now think that message might be. Mr. Sini?
Again, it'd be as simple as we're trying to reflect what the community is, what the majority of the community has told us, and you'll get more data in the survey in terms of masking. But I think it goes to let us make a local decision around our medical data and allow our local medical officials to weigh in on the decision whether or not to mask the children.
Mr. Maroney, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement that it should be about local control, and we should, in conjunction with our local health officials, decide on what is best for our community, not be dictated to by Hartford and the state.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Mrs. Ritchie?
I'm 100% for getting masks off our children when it's safe to do so. I guess my concern with a communication like this is, are we now saying that we will always ignore CDC guidelines, and are we not taking that into effect? I think, yes, we have people in the community that want to unmask our children, but we did hear from people that are not comfortable with that because under 12 are not getting a vaccine at this point in time. So I'm not opposed to a communication, but I want it to be effective. I want it to be appropriate. And who do we write to? Is it the state? Is it the CDC? And I guess at the end of the day, what is the purpose of the communication and the ultimate goal for writing the letter? What do we want to see come out of that?
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Mrs. McCammon? Can you hear me?
Am I good? I probably have a terrible internet connection, so I'll be fast and hopefully clear. I'm comfortable with a communication at the state level that emphasizes decision-making, that correlates local data and what local health officials are seeing. I do think that it requires at the same time that we commit as a board and as an administration to support those in our community who feel that they need to keep a mask on because they have medical issues or just don't feel comfortable yet. We won't be offering remote learning. So I just think that any communication should come with a commitment to supporting the people in our community who want to stay masked. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Mrs. Parent?
I was just going to say that we have to be careful when we say that it's the majority of people in this town that want to be unmasked. I think we've heard the people that we've heard from. Yes, more of them would prefer to be unmasked, but I think there's 4,400 kids, and we heard from maybe 20 families tonight. So I think we have to be really careful. We represent everybody.
Correct.
And if we're going to say that the majority want to be unmasked, we need to have the data to support that. And I don't know that we do right now.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Ackman.
So, and look, these messages are always difficult to work through. This is part of it. So, and I've supported local control. I've testified for local control up in Hartford. So I like the idea of it, but viruses aren't local. So I think that if we're going to make that argument, we have to somehow sort of define it, right? We have employees going all over the state and to other states and coming back in. So what is local control? So I think my push would be whatever we are saying to the state is that it, if that's the way we choose to go, is that we would like to, we recognize our role. Our role is in school governance, but our role is not in public health. And so that we would like decisions to be made by public health authorities based on data. That's a fair statement to make. Because I don't want people unmasking or masking without correct data. But I think this one's tricky. I think it's tricky because this isn't like an issue we debate locally or we put our heads together and Darien has a different way of doing it. Viruses aren't local. So I would caution around things like local control rather than maybe talking to the health professionals and saying, how could we define this locally? How could we look at data locally? How would it affect our children? And I think even before a message, we'd really have to kind of workshop that, which is possible. I mean, if we feel strongly about it, we can make the time for it.
Yeah.
But this is a little more complicated than any sort of political or educational issue per se.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Dr. Adler.
So, Mr. Chairman, yeah, you haven't mentioned this is a board communication, which is fine. If it resides at a board communication and you want to do it as a board communication, if it has a co-signature of the superintendent, I can't advocate for not removing the mask. I do think that someone like Dr. Kennefack and so on would probably support the position of consideration being given to less quarantining for cases that are identified. I think there's room to perhaps message something like that, and I think that the health officials, our health officials, would support that type of message. But I do agree we have to be very careful about how we message it.
Yeah, no, understood. I think we wanted to have the conversation this evening and see where we were so we can continue the dialogue. I do agree. It's about local control. It's about following the science. I think it's also about an option. And I think to Mr. Brown's point, I think we have to think through long and hard at all levels, elementary, secondary, and high school, the communication and how we're communicating to those kids that there are kids that are going to wear masks. It's like the conversation that I've heard out in the street, are you vaccinated or you're not vaccinated? We have to think very carefully about how we're communicating or educating our students around some will wear masks, some will not wear masks if it comes to that option. Mrs. Ritchie.
I think Dr. Adley brings up an important point about any communication that we have. I hope that whatever communication we put together, that it is in with consultation with our local health officials and get their guidance and their suggestions as well, because I think we as a board are not health professionals. I think for me, it would be very important that yes, we have local data, but we do have local health officials too. So I would like them to be kept in the loop on any communication that we send.
Yeah, it would have to be a joint effort amongst all those parties. Thank you, Mrs. Ackman.
So not something we'll solve tonight, but something for the 9 of us to think about. It's a very unique and interesting position to be advocating for something that your superintendent cannot support. And it's something I think we should think about.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that point up. Okay, we've got a continued long agenda. So thank you for that conversation and that dialogue, and we'll continue that.
But Duke, are we going to talk about some aspects of the plan as well?
Yeah, because I do have questions on the plan itself.
You know, the block at the high school and.
Yeah, well, we're moving into that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. We're going to move into presentations and discussions. So we will move into now the board discussion. Services and Board of Education policies around COVID-19. So Dr. Adley.
I'm happy to answer them under this if it's okay with people. It probably does fall under the other agenda item, I think, Mr. Chairman, but I'm happy to answer it under mine if you want.
So I think, everyone has gotten the information and read through, and I think a lot of people have their questions. So if we want to move to specific questions around the plan, if that's in agreement with everyone, is there anything you wanted to talk through first, Dr.?
Well, okay, so I'll just frame it, and then I guess we'll just open it up real quickly then.
Okay.
So just to close out the year, this is a wonderful picture. And down to see 0 cases after all what we've been through and we had about 150 or so who stayed the course on remote learning. So I had this as basically my agenda items to talk about. So the in-person instructional community service plan, so that would fall under this, so you could certainly talk about that. The American Rescue Act plan, the about $1 million that we have in expenditures it remains the same categories. So that has been distributed before. That is not due, I think, until August at some point, Mr. Riddle. I think it's August some point. August 16th. So that still remains. It continues to make a working draft until we have to actually submit it. I'll stop at number 1 because it talks about the in-person and continuity of services plan. We heard feedback from the community tonight, and if board members have further questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Great, thank you. Mr. Sini.
Just the question that came up on the block, scheduling at Darien High School. We heard some public comment in favor, but anecdotally, I'm hearing the opposite. These time blocks sometimes become overwhelming. It's almost comparative to some college marathon classes that I took. So maybe talk about the benefits from an education or the cost benefit of a block versus a regular schedule.
So the people that I've heard from at the moment is certainly less than about 10 people, including the people who we had this evening. Some people came along later this afternoon a little bit, and I understand the question. The idea of how this was first introduced, in the sense of how it is introduced in this particular packet. It talks about less contact for teachers with students and that type of stuff. Yes, that's true, right? But I think I've also been very clear from the start that this was an opportunity. One of the things that the board has asked continually is, what have you learned from COVID and so on? And this is one of the things that the high school staff felt that they've learned, that there's real possibility in this. And actually, I would be surprised if you got the high school staff, any high school staff, to try to go to this type of thing automatically in any other given year. It would take 5 years of preparation and so on and so forth, which is not like a bad thing either. But it gives the opportunity to continue that. And it also, the high school, I mean, that's a big school. And if you can do we still are required to do some distancing, right? And some restrictions and some spacing. And it does it to a degree, but it's not the overwhelming reason to do it, right? It's there, it's been used as a schedule. It's has had good feedback, actually, and we'd like to explore it in a more normal setting to see if, as kids sort of collaborate more, this is a good opportunity to see, is this something that ultimately we would proceed with down the line? So it's not all just one for one. It really isn't really all for one reason.
Is there a cost of it from an educational standpoint? You run out of steam after an hour, or attention span, or anything like that. Was there any downside, I guess, is the question of running that model?
Well, I think that the staff is also looking at things like it doesn't have to end up like that, because you could have a hybrid of that, where 2 days a week, for instance, or 1 day a week, you have the 8-period schedule. Just right, you could have the actual schedule as a normal schedule on a different day if you wanted to, so that you have the experience of both experiences, the block and the 1 through 8 type thing. So those are things that over the year, they're not going to go to that schedule, but those are discussions that for future years, if there was a desire to discuss that and go to it, you could do variations of it. I think what you're learning is for students really to get into things, a block schedule provides them the opportunity to do that. Now, in all honesty, you also have to give some professional development for teachers to actually share what you might, because what you do in a 40-minute block is not necessarily what you would do in a 90-minute block. So those things also have to go hand in hand a little bit.
Is this permanent? Sorry, the last one. Is this permanent, or is this as part of the COVID mitigation?
It's a wee bit of both. I'm combining a wee bit of mitigation of as limited as what it can be, but it's also in all transparency, an opportunity to continue this, to see, is this something that we'd like to recommend as a future
As a permanent policy?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mrs. Ritchie.
Yeah, so we did hear from a handful of people with concerns about the block schedule, but this is something the board has been contemplating for years. I have experience with the block schedule with another child, and it's worked really well at the upper school level. But maybe, Chris, you could just speak to the block schedule and how common it is in high schools and upper schools and how it can be effective.
The block schedule is becoming more and more common in secondary school.
Did you say more and more?
More and more common.
Thank you.
There's the advantages to it are it does start to acclimate students to more realistic schedule they'll experience post high school. The only time in anyone's life that they experience learning in 45-minute chunks is in middle school and high school. And that is not typically a long enough chunk of time to really get into deep learning. So there are benefits that way. As a former high school principal who lived the transition from the rotating 8-period day to a block schedule, there's also a lot of, I'll call them social and emotional gains, because the pace of the day changes for kids. The transitions in the building are far less. There's less instructional time lost to transitions that happen during the day as well. So there are more benefits than not in my experience, and I would say in empirical educational research as well.
Thank you.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. Dr. Adler, you touched a little bit on my question. Will the district be providing, or maybe this is for Mr. Tranberg too, providing PD for the high school faculty?
Well, so later on there's a PLC discussion about extending some of that PLC time. We can't take all of the PLC time away from them. So it would be my intention or our intention during that time that the staff have an opportunity to learn together, talk together about how to do this, and also some assistance if they need it.
Mr. Maroney.
Is the open-end policy the same as the block schedule as well? Is that a COVID-related concern, or is that something that we found has worked and we want to continue that post-COVID?
Principal Dunn is here at some point, but basically I would say it's basically the same as the last one. It's a kind of a combination. Actually, the kids rose to the challenge, and I actually firmly believe in when you set our students, all students actually rise to the expectations that you give them, and this has been proven to be something that has worked. It also, as minimal as it may seem, it reduces some of the size of people, the population in the building at any one given time. But that's not the preponderance of the reason it seemed to work, and I would like to explore that again.
Mrs. Achman.
Unblock, I know this year we didn't have lab sciences, so is there just planning going into how labs, hopefully now that we have a more normal return to school, can fit into that block scheduling? I just want to make sure that.
We are having, yes.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ritchie.
Sorry, I don't want to get too much into the meat of the plan. I
No,
know
it's
a lot
okay.
of work went into it, and I do just, one of the things I'd love to see as we're moving ahead, and we're talking about academic needs and specifically in the secondary level, as we provide students with actionable feedback and academic goals, I'd love to hear more about what format and how we're going to do that, and how do we make sure that who's it going to? Is it going just to the students? Is it going to the parents? And how do we follow up on that? And you don't have to answer any of these questions right now. These are just as I walked through the plan, things that just came up to me. And it's another under special ed, just as we're assessing our goals and IEP goals and objectives, just hopefully, surely we can get a sense of, as we're moving along, I know we're probably having some PPTs still, and are those numbers still going up? Are they flatlined? Where are we in terms of IEPs? Do we have significantly more now than we have in the past? Just trying to get a sense of making sure that we have resources in place that we need. There was a typo, but I'll tell you about it later. And then another question I had was under remote learning. It kind of outlined the circumstances of why someone would be in remote learning. The one sentence that I wasn't really clear on what that meant was, it says the type of instructional delivery is not a choice for families of students required to quarantine and will be assigned by the student's teacher. So that sounds like it might be fluid and different based on each classroom teacher. So just confirming that all of our students are now going to be back in the lunchrooms for all of their lunch periods. Is that correct?
Correct. So the plan again tries to get our students with the flexibility that we have as back to as normal a schedule as possible.
Great,
But
thanks.
ultimately, the remote learning is not a choice for parents. I did hear a parent saying you wouldn't be sending the kids to school. Well, then there's not going to be a choice of, you're not going to have the option to do remote learning unless we sort of have to say you have to quarantine, right? So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Thank you.
I don't see another alternative for quarantining because we've had the experience of remote learning. I think it's only fair to continue that.
It just, that sentence made me seem like remote learning is going to have a different definition depending on the teacher. So I guess I would just like to have a clear understanding of.
What page is that, Deb?
I don't have, page 11, page 11.
Thank
So
you.
I think that it's just, that sentence was a little confusing to me.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make sure we were clear to parents what's going to happen under the scenario of a student being quarantined or a school can't, like what format is that remote learning going to be in?
Okay, that's fine. That's yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Any other further board comments or questions around that? Right. Do you want to move on to health and safety?
I'll just be
Dr.
very quick. I talk about health and safety. It says ESY, but also should be, my apologies, should be DSS also. So essentially that's starting next week. There will be mask wearing in the building. There's no mask wearing outside the building. We have space and for social distancing inside the building. We will be open for parents and so on and so forth. The buildings will be rented out and that type of stuff. So we're trying to make that transition as best we can next week. And again, if people have to quarantine from DSS or ESY, then there will be remote learning for that too. So it's sort of just sort of replicating a little bit. And I just wanted to share kind of the big picture items there, since some instructional model is happening right next week. But so I just wanted to let you know the context. I think you know, but I just wanted to be sure just to touch upon those. If you have any questions about that before we move on to the Board of Ed.
Mr. Brown.
The people renting out the building, will they be wearing masks?
If they're in a school building, they'll have to be.
Thank you.
Duke, this is Jill. Can I just add one comment?
Sorry, Jill, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to, it doesn't fit exactly neatly within the plan framework, but just wanted to mention communication. There is stakeholder feedback and there is your periodic review process, because we do know that we'll have a couple of things like Deb mentioned earlier. We could be looking at different numbers for special education, for example, also for RBI and other kinds of interventions. So just asking us to be explicit about how we're communicating administration to board, board to community, administration to community, as we look at parameters that may be changing underneath us that we may need to respond to, whether it's financially or as an organization. Thank you.
So for special education, we'll come back to the board if and when we feel as if we have to do that. There's money in the budget. There was, I think, 200 in the original budget, and there's money set aside in the ARP here. But if things change, all I can tell you is what I know now and what we're planning for. And if those variables change, Ms. McCammon, I will certainly come back and share those with the board.
I think it would be worthwhile, Dr. Adley and Mrs. Klein, for more of kind of an in-depth update at the next board meeting around how the end of the year played out around PPTs and services, and just kind of so we can get a feel for, you've spoken about the trend and what you've seen, but I think an update at the next meeting, because then that gives us also time before the start of the school year. If there's anything that you're seeing or trends we're seeing that we want to talk through a little more. Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. Is that okay? Are we? So Board of Education meetings, I put this on because the board has been good enough to go along with the policies that we have and modeling what we have for the staff. But this does actually end at the end of the year, or at the end of June, well, June 30th, right? So the requirement around these meetings just ends. So essentially you could go back to having regular meetings. Now, if you look at what's happening on the municipal side, you could do that. essentially this ends June 30th. Let's leave it at that. However, the implementer bill, to my knowledge, will have currently includes 3 provisions. One would be to do the hybrid stuff that we've kind of been doing. 2 would be to go to what like the Board of Selectmen is doing at the moment, sort of restricted seating and no masks, right? Or you go back to what it was pre-COVID, which essentially is to go back to what, if this expires June 30th, then you go back to normal meetings. That's what I understand is in the implementer bill. I can't be 100% certain that it'll be signed or otherwise, but if it isn't signed or if those things are removed at the last minute, by June 30th, the requirements around board meetings no longer apply. So to try to move the discussion forward, I understand we have a modeling for the school buildings. We're still not in a school building, so we have the opportunity to. There's some wriggle room there. And there's an opportunity to go back to the normal meeting. So at this point, I'd be saying go back to the normal meeting, unless the board felt differently, and I would understand them feeling that way. But as we turn into July, we have to make a decision of what we want to do as a board in terms of how we want to meet.
I would ask that in your saying go back, one option to go back to a regular board meeting, do you also see us continuing to include or have the Zoom option for folks?
Well, I think that's a worthwhile discussion, right? What has the board learned through this process? Has that communication been helpful? I think in many ways it has been. So you might want to include this as an option because it seems to work for people. They don't have to come out. And certainly our people will come out if they have to, but.
Good. Mrs. Parent.
I just wanted to echo that. I think that this has been incredibly successful and has allowed other people that are not normally sitting in the audience to participate and to learn and to listen. And I think that's been very beneficial. I just want to clarify. So even though this is a Board of Education building, this is not technically a school building.
Correct.
So if after the 30th, we go back to having regular meetings, we do not need to be masked because it is not a school building.
Correct. And if the staff actually ask me, because I think we have to be good experts and model the behavior that we're expecting of our staff members and our children. I would explain. It's just if I had the opportunity not to mask people in schools, I would certainly consider it, and I think the board would consider it. But we don't have that opportunity. But you do have the opportunity here. So.
But I think again, we should always say that if we say no masks, it'll be an option if you want to wear a mask. It will always be an option.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Good. Mrs. Hockman.
So I think we're a government body meeting, so we'll be subject to the open meeting laws of government bodies. I think it's that simple. We're subject to them now. We'll be subject to them if the implementer bill comes in and says what we have to do. So I don't debate what's a school building or say, well, but you have school staff and they're going to see my kid or this. We are subject to open meeting laws. And so we will follow the laws on open meeting laws. And right now, open meeting laws will require public input and availability. So I think we'll probably see a change coming shortly. Or that would be my hope, that we would see a change coming shortly.
Yep. Thank you, Mrs. Hockman. Mr. Sini.
As I understand it, and presence, like allow the public to
Yes.
attend
Yes.
at presence. So
Yes.
I'm all for back to normal with Zoom capabilities. I would say from a board participation level too, we're not back to normal. I mean, my office isn't open. There's some different things happening out in the world.
Sure.
So having that flexibility as a board member to join from Zoom, I think is really important going forward as well. Not something we should often practice, but when need be, especially given this quasi transition time of, again, people working from home and some difficulties there.
So, Mr. Chairman, maybe what we need to do at our retreat is look at some of our policies and how they're affected by what we've learned of the new environment we're in, because our COVID policies will sunset, but maybe
Right.
there are things that we need to enact going forward.
No, good point.
Or not, but one way or the other.
Thank you. Good point. Mrs. Ritchie.
Yep. So I guess my only input is I think Zoom is great and it's worked really well, and I hope that we can keep that in some fashion. But I think under our current policies, we do allow, and they might need to be updated, but I do think we allow participation remotely, but in the past it hasn't been via Zoom. I think it's via like teleconferencing. Marge probably knows better. She definitely know better than I do. But that's something that, yes, I think we should look at our policies and see how we can adapt them to what seems to be the new normal.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in and add my support for keeping the Zoom option open going forward. And just in terms of the masks, I mean, I think it would be great not to have to wear a mask sitting here. It would make the communications much better. I just kind of feel like a bum if we've got the kids still in K through 5 having to wear masks and we don't. So I don't know. It seems like a tough message right there. Just wanted to
Thank you,
put that
Mr.
out.
Brown. Mrs. McCammon, any comments?
No, I'm comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Maroney.
And just a question I have thinking about masks. So in the document, it says that there's no mask required outdoors,
Mhm.
but masks are required at all indoor, anyone entering a building.
Mhm.
So if my recollection, there's only one fall sport that happens indoors and all the rest are outdoors. So girls volleyball happens indoors. So they will have to wear a mask indoors and all other sports will be mask free.
That is certainly all other sports outside would be mask free. Yes, anybody who's out right now, anybody who's outside doing anything is mask free.
Right.
And I would see what the CIC say about we don't have to agree with them, but I certainly would wait to see what they say.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Do you want to move on to policies? I think.
I think Mrs. Ackman did a lovely job summing it up with the policies, to be honest with you. We listed all the policies just for transparency as to the ones that are going to sunset. My suggestion with your understanding and permission is just let them sunset. You have an understanding of the way I'm going to operate summer school, right? So with that understanding, and then Ms. Ackman suggested even the summer here, I'd be happy to bring back those ones that we think we have to reinstitute. Would that be okay with people?
Yeah, I think if the policy committee could
yep.
do some work potentially
Mhm.
and organize those policies that have anything to do around our meetings and participations and Zooms, so that we could have that discussion at the retreat and resolve that.
I can pass the message. to
I don't
Mrs.
know- I don't-
Brown. Steve and I can pass along the message. I'm sure she
Yeah.
would say absolutely.
Yeah, good. All right.
Thank you.
All right, good. All right, thank you, everyone. Any further questions around in-person instruction, continuity, service plan? Good, all right, thank you for the conversation. Moving along, as I said, it was excited to be in person, an incredible graduation ceremony. So we've got Ms. Emanuelson, a report on high school college acceptances and awards, profile in high school class, and post-high school plans. In the interest of a long agenda, but this is very exciting information. Ms. Emanuelson, if you could keep it at a high level. Everyone has the data, and I'm sure this is data people love to look through. So I'd love to hear some high-level remarks, open it up to some board questions. But thank you for all the work in compiling this information. It's impressive.
Thank you. My pleasure. And I will do my very best to keep it brief, but also to honor all the hard work, particularly of our students. And if you'll indulge me in a few opening remarks that I think are important. So I'm so proud to be here to share the plans of our graduating class, the amazing and resilient class of 2021. Do I have screen sharing privileges? I'll go ahead and try and share my screen. Okay.
Yes, that's good, Megan. Yes, that's good.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. As a community, we have climbed a mountain together this year, and led by our seniors, our students gracefully rose to every challenge. They have played their games in masks, walked one way in our hallways, performed concerts and musicals outdoors and virtually, and countless other examples of the new ways we did things this year. They are true history makers, and in so many ways, our Blue Wave pride has never shone brighter than it did this year. We are proud and privileged to work in Darien every year, but it's a special year when you are named #1, and especially in a year like this. It is a true tribute to our fantastic kids, committed community, talented faculty and leadership, and certainly reflective of your support as a board. So thank you for all you do for schools and for our families. As we present plans for the class of 2021, I'd also like to take a brief moment just to acknowledge and celebrate the hard work of our school counseling department and our administrative support staff. We are so fortunate to have such a group of dedicated and passionate educators helping families to navigate all of the challenges of the last 15 months, including the constantly changing landscape of the college admissions. So the class of 2021 by the numbers. We had 317 students in this class. 93% applied to at least one college. 58% were accepted to at least half the schools they applied to. We had 7 presidential scholarship candidates, 21 National Merit Commended Scholars, and 5 National Merit Finalists. 6 students will take gap years, and 6 will study in other countries next year, including Canada, England, France, and Spain. So this data will probably look very familiar to you. More than 92% of our students are pursuing higher education in the fall. The other category, which includes 19 students, does include those 6 students taking gap years, students who are still undecided or exploring their options, students who are continuing beyond a 4th year of high school or participating in other educational programs. We sent materials for over 3,100 applications this year, and considering the smaller size of the class, we feel this is proportional to past years. This represents the total number of transcript requests that we received and does not reflect applications that were withdrawn or incomplete after we had already sent transcripts and other materials. Once we figure in those withdrawns and incompletes, we net 2,358, or an average of 7.4 completed applications per student. The average number of applications and the average number of acceptances per student has remained consistent over the past 4 years. Our senior class is enrolling at 137 different schools this coming year, which is also consistent with previous years. Once again, we did very well in the early decision pools this year. Almost 43% of our students applied under a binding early decision plan. This is also consistent with previous years. 56% of those students who applied early decision were accepted under that plan. Overall, everything has remained fairly consistent, as you can see from year to year. You will notice that the total number of ED applications, 150, versus the number of students applying, 135, is different. The difference is the number reflects ED2 applications. ED2 is a binding decision plan that is later, usually in January, designed to capture students who did not already commit to an early decision in the fall. In some cases, a student may have been deferred or denied by their ED1 school and submitted an ED2 application. This is our most applications this year, and also looking at the 4-year trend. There are no huge changes or surprises here. College of Charleston, Richmond, Northeastern made the list, but they are always popular schools with our students, and so this information has also remained pretty consistent. Same thing with the most attended, very little fluctuation from year to year, no big surprises. You also have a list of school with highest and lowest percentage of acceptances. Each year we look at the schools with the more selective rates of acceptance. For this year, 13 out of the 18 schools on the most selective list, our acceptance rates were actually higher than the national average. And even when comparing national acceptance rates, the sample size is very small. It's important to remember that. If we see anything surprising, we always do some outreach with those schools to learn a little bit more about the admissions profile so that we can better advise families, and we continue to work to develop a relationship with all schools, but particularly the schools where perhaps we're not doing as well as we would hope. No big changes in the geographic distribution of our students. We still have more than a quarter of our students who are staying in New England. And as I mentioned, 6 students who are also going abroad. In our state schools, we saw a slight increase in the percentage of state applications, about a 0.5 percentage point increase over last year. This percentage is reflected as completed applications. And then we saw an increase in enrollment at both UConn, Stanford, and NCC, which was wonderful to see. Chart number 9 in your packet shows our IB analysis. We are always proud of how our kids do in the IB process. We had 70 students, or 22% of the class, apply to at least one IB. This year, we saw increases in percentages of acceptances at a number of schools, including Cornell, Harvard, and Yale. It is important to note that we still have 22 applications that are either on waitlist or have unknown results. And so that's a pretty significant number of just unknown data at this point that may change those attending numbers. But overall, pretty consistent over 4 years. And again, we look at these numbers and we do outreach as needed to further understand what each school is looking for. These are our class averages. And it's the theme of the evening, pretty consistent from year to year. So in terms of GPA and test scores, very, very consistent. So chart number 11 in your packet summarized the result by each school. And so simply to help with the interpretation, the net apply reflects the total transcripts less the incompletes and the withdrawn applications. And if you go from the other direction, when you add acceptances, deny, and waitlist, it may not necessarily add up to the net apply because it doesn't include apps that are still listed as deferments or unknown results. These are student self-reports, so sometimes we have some unknown results still. And then just the way that the data is collected, if a student was waitlisted and then accepted, it's possible they would be listed in both places. So particularly this year, we wanted to gather a little bit of additional information to give some color and to answer some questions that many of our families and our community members have. So I think that some of the information that we found was very interesting. So we always like to report on special programs. I know it's always a question that the board has. And so we asked the question specifically this year. 35 students reported that they would be participating or were admitted to a special program. And these programs included dual degree programs, honors programs, first-year study abroad opportunities where students will be going directly to an abroad program, which is a very unique opportunity. Our NCC College Steps program, health professions, scholarships, and other prestigious programs that are specific to a major, usually engineering or business. In a year where virtually every school, including the Ivies, were test optional, we were curious to collect some data on how that impacted our students' choice to submit test scores. As you may know, since this class had so many test dates canceled last spring, we wanted to support every student's chance to take a standardized test if they chose to. So we worked hard to arrange for our seniors to have a DHS-only September ACT administration at DHS. And also we provided an October SAT school day option. So any student who wanted to have the opportunity to take either an ACT or an SAT was guaranteed that opportunity. So we were very pleased to be able to do that. We had approximately 115 students take the ACT and about 145 seniors that took advantage of that SAT school day option. So very much worthwhile. And as you can see, nearly half of our students submitted their test scores to all schools, even though they weren't required to. So I think that really speaks to the pride that they took in their test scores and how well they performed on those tests. We were also really curious about the wait list and how that might change. And so I think, as you can see, only a small number at this stage had said that they would change their college decision if they were admitted off of a wait list at this point. It's a pretty small number. And then I found this slide to be very interesting. We asked students, did the COVID-19 pandemic impact your college process and or decision? And as you can see, about half of the students said it did not. And then when students did indicate that there was an impact, these were some of the things that they indicated, the ways in which they were impacted. Probably not many surprises here. The overwhelming majority of the feedback was about visits. And I know for anybody I have a rising senior, visits have been tricky. Not being able to see schools, even before they made the decision. That was the overwhelming feedback about how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted. And then, as you can see, some other examples that also are understandable as well. We always love to understand, and it's interesting and valuable to learn where our students are interested in studying. So the numbers associated are actually the number of students that indicated. So these were sort of the bulk of what they indicated. So for example, 34 students indicated that they were undecided, 26 students indicated they would be majoring in business. And then these were also noted, just with fewer students identifying them. And so I think it's a huge variety of interests, and we truly can't wait to see where their journeys will take them. So thank you all for the opportunity to share the information about the impressive accomplishments of this class, and I'm happy to take any board questions.
Thank you, Ms. Emanuelson. Great information, as always, exciting information to see. So thank you for compiling all that information.
My pleasure.
Richie.
Thank you, Megan. I love seeing this every year, and congratulations to the class of 2021. Just amazing. I was so happy to have the in-person graduation and the prom and all those wonderful events. The one thing I'd love to see us continue to track, and I'm sure you will, and thank you for all this additional information related to COVID, but I'd love to continue to hear about test optional and our students who are not submitting test scores. The trend was probably a little higher this year because of COVID and the inability to take those tests, but that's something that we're seeing a shift in a lot of students' applications where they do opt to not include those test scores. So that's something that I'd love to see as we move ahead, just continue to keep an eye on that. Thanks. Thanks, Megan.
It'll be part of a larger trend that we're keeping an eye on of what schools decide to do about their testing policies. I think even schools who didn't plan to go test optional this year, this has been sort of a pilot for them too. And it'll be really interesting as we meet either virtually or in person with almost 200 college representatives that visit DHS in the fall. That will be one of the questions we ask them is if they weren't test optional and now have decided to, what their reasoning is, or if they decided to return to a testing policy, kind of what they've learned. So we're looking forward to having those conversations with our higher ed colleagues to understand what they learned about being test optional and how valuable part of their process they found that to be.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, I had the same comment on the test, and thank you again. Again, this is always one of my favorite meetings that we have. And I had the same question: is it going to continue post-COVID? But my other question as well is, do we have any state average, area average, national average of what percentage students didn't submit test scores as well?
I have not seen that data, but it's certainly an interesting question to see, as on a statewide or a national level. I do think, again, we were incredibly fortunate to be able to have the school community and district support to be able to offer those testing opportunities. And so I think our students had testing opportunities that perhaps other areas did not have, but I'm certainly happy to see if that data becomes available.
Mrs. Ackman.
I just wanted to say thank you to the guidance department. I know how hard they pushed to try and make sure that students had ACT and SAT opportunities during a very stressful spring, summer, and then this fall. So kudos to you guys, whether schools take them or not, kids had the option. And I was glad Darien Public Schools were able to provide that to the children who were interested, because I know people were traveling all over to different states because they didn't think. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Mr. Cini.
Perhaps you could comment on, I think I backed into the number 23 or 24 students that aren't going in the 4-year college, 2-year college, or the college prep school. I realize it's a small sample set and data series of individuals, but can you give us some color, if you have a sense of some are going to technical colleges or technical schools or education or some sort of career school?
Yeah, so I think on one of the slides, it actually has the numbers of students. Are you referring strictly to like those 19 students of the other?
Yeah, maybe my math is off, but we have 293 going to in the slide, in the summary information slide, the class of 2021.
Correct.
293 are going to 4-year, 2-year in college prep school. So I just backed out the 3 minus 293, basically. Wondering where they're headed.
Yep. So we have a few students that are heading to employment. We have a student who's joining the military. We certainly have some students, and this is no surprise this year, that have been a small handful of kids that applied to schools, but are really still trying to decide if pursuing education is what they want to do this year. They have some other opportunities, either employment or some travel opportunities. So there's a small handful of those. We do have a student attending a career education technical school. And then there are, again, a few students who are continuing beyond 4 years with us.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for all of this. This is fascinating, fascinating stuff. I just have a question. One of our favorite questions around the table is, what have you learned from COVID? And I'm curious what you think will change in the college counseling world going forward. What will stay? What will leave? What have you learned that you could be doing better? What's your overall experience then?
My gosh, I feel like we could talk about that for a really long time, and I'm so looking forward to our Augusties with my team to really digest and process that, because I'm not quite sure we've really had a chance to fully process to the extent that we would like, all of the very important and rich questions that you just asked. I think what we have said day in and day out, and I think we've heard it from you, we've heard it from our staff, is I think we've learned what kids can do and how kids can rise to occasions, and the adaptability and the resiliency and the flexibility of our students. And to be able to sit here and report and say that this year looks very similar to past years for our students, and that our data is extremely similar to past years for our students, I think more than anything is a testament to our kids and their commitment to kind of staying the course and to to pursuing their interests and their dreams, certainly the support of their families, the staff and the faculty and the counselors and the administration, how everybody was just committed to keeping, these kids on track to get to where they wanted to be. And so I think, to start the conversation, probably a much longer conversation, I've learned what we can do together. I've learned how powerful it is when everyone just does what's best for kids, and has faith in kids and says to kids, what do you need and how can we help you? And so I absolutely am looking forward to a full process with my team. And we're looking forward to, again, meeting virtually in person with all of our higher ed colleagues to digest that as well, because I think everyone's just been on the fly trying to make it happen and haven't had full opportunity to have those discussions to the extent that we would. But they're important conversations and I look forward to them.
Thanks.
Mrs. Emanuel said, I would just ask, as you go through your meetings in the fall and all, something you said about you look at those schools where our acceptance rate may have changed, and whatever you think is a significant change, I think it would be interesting if there's any feedback there that you get from those schools that you bring it up through the board, through the administration and to the board, if there's anything that we can be doing more or differently, or the feedback that those schools are giving you about Darien or our students, would love to hear it.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Any other further questions or comments? Mrs. Klein.
If I may add three things. One, I know we look each year of other opportunities for some of our students with learning differences. And in addition to the NCC program that Megan just referenced, many of our students have opportunities to be in transition programs both in state and out of state. So we're excited for their successes also. And just modestly, Megan, I want to say on behalf of all the great work you and the school counselors did, the work you continue to do for accommodations for students with learning differences and 504 plans, and your battles with ETS and working with college boards really have supported all of our learners. So thank you.
My pleasure, Shirley. I love to fight with the college board.
And you do great.
I should add, and Dr. Adley, you'll back me up here because we were both there. And I'll just take a quick second and say congratulations to those incredible students that graduated from Fitch Academy. Yeah. There was an incredible group of students. There was a graduation up at Weed Beach. It was a perfect morning. It was a packed house. I believe there were 8 graduates, and I believe 4 of them have been in Fitch for all 4 years. So it was incredibly exciting. The parents and family are incredibly appreciative of our ongoing support of that program. And it was just something amazing to see those students participate in that.
It was. And I will say that I've been redundant here, but we have a phenomenal guidance department and with phenomenal leadership that speaks for itself.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Any other questions, further questions around this? All right, again, great data. Thank you, Mrs. Emanuelson. Appreciate it. Always great to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Moving on, further presentations and discussions, vision of the graduate, further discussion and vote. Dr. Adley and Mrs. Dunn.
So we're glad to bring this again to the board. Thank you for your support of the vision of the graduate, actually to everybody who contributed to this, which is to me is a terrific document. I would put this against any vision of the graduate across the state. We did have, I think, one request to clarify the positively influence in our community and our world and what we meant by students being able to be advocates for social justice. So I will let Mrs. Dunn speak to that or anything else she wants to say about the vision of the graduate, but it's here for the board's consideration for adoption.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank Megan for that wonderful report as well. Just to clarify the term, I think Ms. McCammon had asked at the end of the last meeting. I think it's written and it's in the spirit of the entire document, in that we would ask our students to lead and advocate on behalf of others. In terms of equity and inclusion of all members of their community. I think it's reflected throughout the document that way. And I think it matches, the spirit of it is to match up with the mission that we've just adopted in the district. The students who contribute to the world with integrity and purpose beyond themselves. So we were looking for the opportunity for our students to lead and advocate for others. the spirit in which it was presented.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. We'll open it up for board questions or comments. Mrs. Ritchie.
I'm just confused. I thought the subcommittee was going to be finalizing this in the fall, or this is the final document that we're approving this tonight.
No, this is it.
Okay, and my notes, I don't know why I had that in my notes, but I did. Okay.
Mrs. Ackman.
I would just make a motion, if there's no comments, a motion to approve the vision of the graduate as stated in the document dated today, whoever has today's date.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
I actually have a question.
Sure.
I don't know procedurally, do we vote on yours first and then come back to questions, or how do we want to do it?
No, yeah.
Okay. Quick question. So just, I think there was the term used in there, social justice, and there's also the term equity. And I guess Principal Dunn, the question to you, what are the definitions of those two terms as you view them?
The equity is in our core values for the district. And so it's that we would treat each other within our school community with respect, and that all students would be included in all ways throughout the experiences of our building and our school community.
But, so I get the gist of it, but what is the definition of those words seems to be what the question was. If you don't have it, that's fine. I'm just trying to understand, when somebody says the word social justice to you, what does that mean to you?
Well, that's what I've just described, that we would be treating one another with equity, and we would include all students. So that's a just environment that we would be creating.
Thank you.
I think in the spirit, if I may, just through the strategic plan, for me, it's really sort of advocating for fairness for all students, and supporting students' rights and supporting their access to participation, and their equity, which is really meaning not letting any differences get in the way. And the differences could be race, it could be sexual orientation, it could be disability, it could be any of those things.
Mr. Sini.
Could I boil it down to the term equal opportunity? I mean, is that what we're getting at?
Well,
offering equal opportunities to
for equity is for providing students what they need for equal opportunity. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Any other further questions or comments? Mrs. McCammon?
Yes, this is Jill. Ellen, thank you for the definition, and I appreciate it. And I certainly understand it in the context of the document. Part of my reason for asking the question, and then what I've been reflecting on since, is we put it under integrity and social. If I were a student, an 11th grader, let's say, and looking at integrity and thinking, did I meet properly what social justice means, would that specific terminology be clear enough, or should we be more specific in using some of the language we just have about what we mean? Again, only because it's a fairly broad definition out in the world, and it means something a bit differently, I think, depending on your context versus the actual context of Portrait of a Graduate. And because we've linked it to integrity, I wanted to make sure that a student would have all of the tools at hand to properly say, yes, I have met that.
Mrs. Dunn can chip in as well as I can speak to this, because I wasn't part of the committee there. But for me, actually, Ms. Ackman was part of the committee, so maybe she can speak to it too. But for me, under integrity, advocating for fairness for all students is something I think we want our students to be able to do. And listen, at some point we have to name these things, right? And if we're going to address issues, and I understand some of these words actually and concepts are socially charged. I understand that. And I very much respect that. But certainly for me, for under integrity, for me, that's what it means. We're advocating for fairness of all people, right? And all kids and people that we come in contact with.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. Mr. Brown.
So a quick question. I'm going to throw this to Chris. I'm just looking at empathy as a learning outcome, and one of the bullet points, the last, says, I can passionately advocate for an inclusive, equitable community. And my question to that is just thinking about this in terms of metrics and measurement and how we're going to be able to get our hands around that. I mean, The term compassionately advocate seem rather subjective, and I'm just highlighting this one example. How do you build a framework around and how do you measure whether this goal is achieved by a particular student?
I know that this is the next level of work of what the high school plans to do. They have to kind of operationalize each of these and work on those metrics. But in general, it's about the experiences that you provide students. And when you think about things like internships, when they have those experiences to be out in the world and demonstrate them, are places that you'll be able to collect some of that information over time. So you want to think about the authentic experiences they're having, not just the sitting down and the traditional metrics we think of happening in class. And Ellen might be able to, I'm sure the committee started to talk about that, but I go to authenticity right away compared to traditional learning experiences.
And so I guess the question to that would be, I mean, again, authenticity is itself subjective. And I appreciate that that's the second level work, but as a board member, it's a little tricky to hear that I have to vote for it to find out what it's going to be. It's kind of a tough position. And so, you know, when I look at some traditional metrics, like what did you score on a math test, or can you diagram a sentence, that's fairly objective and that's easy to do. My concern around this is so much of it's subjective. I just wonder how we can move this forward without knowing how it actually works. And that's kind of the question I would have around, you know, that specific and a number of other ones as well. I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit for the second level, or how we can get comfortable at this stage.
Just not having been on the committee, I'm probably not the best person to respond to that, but I know Ellen was, Mrs. Ackman was as well.
Mrs. Dunn, do you want to speak to the next level of work, or?
Yeah, sure. You know, as it's written, it is a vision of the graduate. And in fact, these are some of the outcomes, the lunar outcomes that we've defined beyond the first page, which is the vision as written by the community. It is a K-12 vision. It's not a high school vision per se. And so I think that's an important clarification as well. And so the work to do now is to, at each grade level, begin the discussion of how we provide opportunities for students to demonstrate proficiencies in these areas. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that we've given students opportunities through curriculum, through the experiences they have, things like the internship, student-centered sort of work that we're excited to begin and continue working on, to make sure that they have opportunities to show us in real ways that they have mastered and are growing in these areas. You know, there's no one who's perfect in all of these areas. No human being probably who's able to show that they do all of these things all the time. So as a vision, it's written to set goals for all of us as a school community in all grade levels, all the way from kindergarten through K-12, so that we can hold our school accountable as well for, I think, what are some very, very important qualities in the person that we will graduate.
So, Mr. Deneen, if I may.
Yes, Mrs. Ackman.
And I don't want to leave Dennis out because he did work. In fact, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, all those categories at the top seemed set when I came in. So Dennis, you might be able to speak to them. But from my observation on the committee, a vision of the graduate did take into account some of the more subjective things. We have test scores. We know what an A means. We know what a B means. A vision of a graduate was going beyond that. And so I think, Mr. Brown, you correctly identify that some of these things are more subjective and measurable in new and different ways. And I also think that we're preparing students for both a subjective and objective world. And so there are going to be some skills that are not A, B, C, or D. And there was a lot of talk on the committee and in the focus groups that we've done a great job preparing students academically. Are we doing as good of a job preparing them for a little more of those esoteric things? So I don't know if Dennis has something to add to that, but that was the, kind of my reporting back on some of the more subjective nature of the things we see up there.
Mr. Maroney, anything to add?
Yeah, not to really add much more. I think Mrs. Ockman summed it up quite well, but our thought was just a lot of the focus and feedback from the original discussions were just about how do you become a good citizen of the world? And that was a big part of it. Yet we can do students, and to Mr. Brown, that's easy to understand. It's how do you become a good citizen of the world? And that's a bigger, complex discussion. And I think Mrs. Dunn went through it, is that this is the vision, and then, and I appreciate Mr. Brown's point, but we do have to have the vision and then you backfill from there. You can't have everything all done at once. So I understand his point, and I think he has a valid point, but I think we have to trust the process and say, this is where we want to be, and then how do we get there is to be determined.
So I think good. Go ahead, Dr. Adler.
Yeah, it is a good question, Mr. Brown, and these topics tend to be the most difficult, even from years gone by, whenever high schools had to do sort of civic goals and aspirations. One of the good things is that we're going to hear in a moment that this new NASC accreditation process, which is a new process, will actually require the district, I can tell you right now, it's going to require the district to do metrics for this, and it's going to require them to do, as part of the self-study, identify how they're going to do that. So certainly it's not unusual the stage they're in. In fact, a lot of schools, their recommendation will be develop a vision of the graduate. I would speculate that Ellen will be leading the faculty through that self-study process to actually identify some of these measures, and the NAC accreditation will hold them responsible for doing that.
Good. Anything further, Mr. Brown? So I think, no, all good points and all good conversation. I think what we want to do is move forward the work that's been done to lay out the vision of the graduate, knowing there's more work and more reporting that will come back to the board. I think everyone understands, the board is very interested in seeing metrics and progress. So I think, Alan, with your update on the NEASC, that might help us too. But I think a lot of good work's gone into this. And I think, my thought immediately, I think with some of the stuff you said, Mr. Tranberg, is, understanding what these kids are doing in terms of volunteerism and different things like that through the community. There's a great partnership with the Depot and other organizations. So I think that plays into some of these categories as to how they build themselves as a good citizen, so to speak. Make sense? Yeah. Okay.
So there's a motion.
Yep. Oh, all right. Mrs. Ockman made the motion, second by Mrs. Ritchie. So we'll move forward with the vision of the graduate. All those in favor? That is everyone. Jill, are you taking notes?
She's in favor. Yep.
Got it.
Well, it's not unanimous. Mr. Brown, Mr. Maroney, are you? Okay.
You mean against and abstaining?
Yeah, against or abstaining, Mr. Brown? Voting no? Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. So Jill, Mr. Brown is voting no? Okay, thank you all for the conversation and the good questions. So Dr. Adley, we'll move right into the high school NEASC accreditation process.
I think Mr. Melissa's Kate is going to speak to this issue, but this is a wee update in terms of the accreditation process. What does that look like? It's a new process. It's new standards that they're using versus 10 years ago. I think it was like 2012 they were last here. Recommendations that were made at that time included things like solidifying the curriculum, providing opportunities for teachers for greater professional development opportunities. Those were a couple of things that came out of it, the 21st century learning expectations, to define those. But it's basically a decennial report, but I'll let Kate and Ellen speak to the new standards and what we might expect in 2014.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Kate to take us through the slides. Our last visit was 2012. The next visit will be in 2024. So we're actually 12 years, not technically decennial this time, but COVID and actually NEASC was delaying many of the schools before COVID because of the revision of their own standards. So we will see their official visit in 2024, but we begin preparing in the fall. So take it away, Kate.
Thank you. So yes, Dr. Adley, we are preparing for our NEASC accreditation visits. NEASC is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. And if we can move to the next slide, as you referenced, we have NEASC has provided us with 5 standards. They used to have 7 and they've streamlined down to 5. Those 5 are student learning, learning culture, professional practices, learning support, and learning resources. So in the previous process, districts were asked to provide evidence towards the 7 standards with over 50 indicators, and that was generated into a narrative report, which was then provided at the decennial visit. The new process is to self-assess on these 5 standards. If we can move to the next slide, please. So we have a steering committee, which is Mrs. Dunn, myself, and Jen Record will be our accreditation coordinator working with us. And we will also form a self-reflection committee to guide the work of analyzing DHS on those 5 standards and across 32 principles within those standards. Part of that work begins with a community survey that is provided to us by NEASC. And then we'll move through an evidence collection. And with the feedback that we have from our evidence collection and our community survey, that will allow us to self-assess on rubrics that NEASC has created towards those principles and standards. We will use that information to then write a self-report that is chunked into the following sections by NEASC. It asks for a look back, current conditions, capacity for continuous growth as a learning organization, goals and vision for the future, and priority areas for the NEASC school growth plan. In addition to having that committee, we will of course be involving the entire school in the process. And there is a requirement, of course, that the entire faculty vote to approve the report prior to sharing it with our NEASC visit. Ahead of the decennial visit, which Mrs. Dunn mentioned will be in 2024, we will first have what's called the collaborative conference visit. So at that point, we will share our self-study, our self-reflection with a smaller team that comes for a shorter period of time. And as a result of that collaborative conference, we will generate goals for ourselves, and that will lead to our school growth plan. So if we move to the next slide, you can see a timeline for this work. You'll see 2 possible timelines, and that's because while we know that our decennial visit is in 2024, we have not yet been provided by NEASC whether that will be in the spring or the fall. In either case, we will undertake the self-study during the next school year. It will determine whether we're in the fall-winter period or the winter-spring based on when our decennial visit actually takes place. So we'll move through that self-study and then into a collaborative conference. From that, we'll have our school growth plan, which we will implement between a year to 18 months. And then we will move back into self-reflection to write a summary report, which will then be evaluated by NEASC at the decennial visit. And so on the next slide, we've summarized our tasks for next year will be that community survey, the evidence gathering for those 32 principles, which will lead us to complete the self-assessment on 5 standards, write our self-reflection, and then prepare to host the collaborative conference. Thank you.
So I will open it up for any board questions or comments. Mrs. Ackman.
Just, were there specific takeaways from the 2012 study that we either know to review or judge ourselves on how we've done for the upcoming survey?
Certainly, I just did the review of the 2012, and certainly things that I would point to that were in there as recommendations to address were solidifying the curriculum. And I think the district has, in that 10-year period, has really done an excellent job of solidifying the curriculum as the foundation of the experiences for the kids, providing professional development opportunities for staff. I don't think our staff is in any way not being supported in the professional learning opportunities, so those were good. There was talk about the whole 21st century learning skills. I would ask Ellen maybe to talk about that, but the whole NEASC in the last 10 years have gone through a whole transition away from those standards. So it was sort of working on both tracks, so to speak. Ellen, I would need to just know exactly that particular one, that the 21st century learning standards, where that started and where that ended. But those were a couple of the main ones that I can point to, just even seeing from a distance that those have been addressed.
Thank you.
Anything you wanted to add, Mrs. Dunn?
I was just going to say that, some of the expectations that were set for there was actually a revision to the standards before the last visit. And some of those have now really become outdated. And so some of the commentary was on, for example, school-wide rubrics of each of the 21st century learning goals. School-wide rubrics were kind of an experiment that NIASC and the world tried, and we found rather difficult, in fact, to apply to every, for example, to apply writing a school-wide rubric to every assignment in every discipline. And so that was some of the feedback we actually gave to them through the process, that this was not something that was easily applicable to our high school and the work that we were doing. And so many of those things have, as Alan said, have changed, and the whole process has been revamped so as not to invade a school for a 3-year period. I mean, the traditional visits and the traditional self-study was very cumbersome, and sometimes took schools through the paces and areas that really weren't necessary. So I really appreciate, for example, we had a whole report the last time on the facility. We had just built a beautiful state-of-the-art facility. And so to put all those teachers through the work of evaluating the heating system for the building was rather ridiculous. So I think what they've done now is streamlined for us to sit, look at the standards and define what we would like to work on, much of which will probably be exactly what we've talked about this evening, which is defining the vision of the graduate in our work K-12 and implementing the strategic plan. So we'll be able to define those things for ourselves and then be evaluated on the work we do on those things. And I think it's a much improved process.
Very good. I'm good. Any other questions, Mrs. Ritchie?
Just a general question. So in preparation, the last time, did we see the same amount of time needed in terms of professional, the PLC days? So are we mirroring what we did in the past in order to prepare for the accreditation?
Yeah, I think if I look back on, I've had 3 NIAS visits in my time during high school. And I think that, we used almost all PD for more than 2 years. And we will not need to do that. We want to protect our PD time. And I think that what we've requested for next year with the PLC mornings will be sufficient to get us ready to do the self-study.
This by any stretch of the imagination that is significantly less than previous NSC accreditation visits.
Good. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Thank you, Mr. Moulis.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Kate.
Okay, so we'll move on to further discussion and possible action on proposed dates and times for high school professional learning communities for 2021-2022 school year. Dr. Adley.
So we're proposing the board take action on this. This is moving this to sort of 7 PLC days to 10 PLC days. Essentially, you get an extra 9 to 9.5 hours of work, which actually accomplishes the work we're just talking about. So we just can't take all the PLC days because we gotta continue the learning and the experience, the professional learning experiences that the teachers are having as well. But this is a way to minimize the disruption, but yet give the staff a reasonable amount of time to do it. It sort of piggybacked onto a process that already happened at the moment in terms of late arrivals. Well, we can take the late arrival into the normal late arrival, which is really 2 hours, and it's done in the hopefully least disruptive way, but also a helpful way to the staff. I did get a parent who asked me, does it have to be Fridays? Well, Fridays were sort of, Alan's talked about it. For me, it was not rocking the boat for, it was Fridays, so I would just keep it on the Friday. And I was also asked, could we tag it on to really work that way because it's only 2 hours anyway, so that doesn't really work. And I'll just point out that I think May 13th, instead of the later arrival in the morning, we'll do the early dismissal in the afternoon and let the kids go off for the prom and so on and so forth.
Okay, good.
So do I have a motion to move forward the proposed dates and times for high school professional learning communities for the 2021-2022 school year? Mr. Sini, second, Mr. Maroney. All those in favor? That is unanimous. You
Thank
good,
you.
Jill? Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Report on the DAEG Barbara Harrington Fund Award, Mr. Tranberg.
Good evening. This is just annual notification, and thank you to the Darien Advocates for Education and the Gifted, DAEG, for their awards of the Barbara Harrington Grant to teachers who have applied. We have 7 different awards this year, totaling $3,245 for a variety of programs across disciplines. There were a few changes to the process this year that the DAEG put in place, really continuously working to make sure they're supporting programs that will give back to as many students as possible, especially students that are enrolled in the programming related to those students identified as gifted. And so there's a brief summary of each of the awards in the memo.
A big thank you from the board to the Darien Advocates for the Education of the Gifted and the Barbara Harrington grants. This is always great and exciting to see the teachers taking advantage of this. Any questions or comments? Great. Thank you, Mr. Tranberg. Moving on, program review, gifted education, Mr. Tranberg.
Well, I'll talk because Teresa is my intern, and I'll invite her to the table. She's been patiently sitting at the back. You may remember Teresa. Teresa Rangel is the principal of Tracy Elementary Magnet School in Norwalk. She served this year as an intern for me through the UConn program, where she is just receiving her O93 certification as a superintendent of schools. I want to say that I've been doing mentoring for this program and participating in this program for as long ago as I can remember, certainly for the last 10 years. No one has been asked to do such an interesting project, a real project that meant that the evaluator had to work with our constituents and certainly has to work obviously with the board, myself. Just a significant project, that an undertaking, and I was very comfortable with Teresa. Teresa is well respected, also has experience in talented and gifted programs. She also did it in collaboration with Nicole Wakunis. Nicole Wakunis is a staff member up at the UConn NEAG School of Talented and Gifted. So there was consult that took place there, but I want to thank Teresa for all of her efforts. She was well received in the district by the staff and has done a tremendous job putting together. She has the full report that may take a wee bit of digestion, and then she'll do a quick summary of it for tonight, and perhaps we can ponder thereafter. But with that, I'll turn it over to Teresa, and thank you, Teresa. Welcome to the board in this different setting. I thank you for all of your work this year. Again, I would say that has been the most comprehensive task that I have assigned to anyone in the program. And I would suggest, I would put it against any project that anybody has done in that program, period. So with that, thank you for all of your efforts, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Adley and board, for having me here. It's been an honor to be not just part of this process of the evaluation, but to be with you as, you know, I watched Darien Reimagine Education this year. So I've been following you, though I haven't been physically present. I've been virtually present for pretty much every single board meeting that you've had since the beginning of the school year.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all part of the learning process, and I truly have been blessed to have been here. So thank you. I'll start with that. As Dr. Adley mentioned, I have definitely had some help and support along this process. Mr. Tranberg, Nicole Wakunis, Dr. Forshaw, and the talented Michelle there, who helped with designing and putting it in a great package for you guys, as well as Linda Johnson, who I know has now transitioned to her new role. So super supported through this work and excited to be here. So although you have a detailed report, I'm going to try to do as high level, if you will. cover that and try to be succinct, which is not an easy task for me. So in order to keep me behaved, I have my notes, I will follow. So I wanted to start with the evaluation process. So this process was done with the team where we shared the purpose of examining best practices in gifted education. So basically, we were charged with identifying program highlights and some considerations for improvement. The process was done through an inquiry process, and there's a chart there that kind of indicates what that looks like, where data was collected, which enabled me to look for some themes, and then highlight and create an evaluation that would help support and identify opportunities for improvement. Some of the resources that were to help with guide is the National Association for Gifted Children, research from the Hanover Research Organization, Dr. Renzulli and Ms. Sally Reese, and Ms. Tomlinson as well. Am I echoing? Is that like weird? Sorry. I'll sit further back. So there was a lot of data collected through this process. There are focus groups with students, the middle school level, focus groups with teachers, focus groups with principals, interviews, observations. They were all virtual observations with the exception of I got to participate in the Achievers Night in person, which was quite a treat. And there were surveys that were given to stakeholders. Students in grades 6 through 9 were given surveys, as well as who identified as gifted in 6 through 9 were to send out surveys, as well as parents of those identified students. And teachers throughout the district that were certified teachers were also given an opportunity to add their voice. For resource and document review, I was able to look at curriculum, anything that you had on your website, past reviews that you were given, board presentations about the gifted program as well. Anything that would kind of help along this process for just gathering what information Darien has available and then comparing that with best practices in gifted education. So program inclusivity, just to go over this part of the report, there are two basic frameworks for identification for gifted programs. One is the traditional model where you're looking specifically at how students are performing academically and looking for high achievement. And the other model is looking, the word inclusivity, I want to touch on this a little bit because it kind of has a slightly different meaning than some of the shades that we can add to that word. In this term, it's not about the twice exceptionality piece of it in that model, in that framework. Darien does have a process for identifying twice exceptional students through the IEP process and working together. This is actually looking and stepping toes closer into actually looking at a gifted and talented program versus it just being a gifted program. So that inclusivity really does incorporate having other metrics in place that you can look at, other non-standardized data that you can collect that can say, well, the student has a gift in this area or that area. So that really is the second framework that could be used for identifying students who are in the gifted program. Again, the inclusivity model being a gifted and talented program. So I had to look at your program models and at each level. And your elementary is either 75 to 90 minutes a week. Within that elementary model, students are pulled out and serviced, and they meet in several different areas within your buildings, sometimes changing spaces. Students are engaging in a curriculum that is primarily literacy-based with some social studies in there. For the middle school, they meet for 90 minutes a week. They're meeting during their lunch and their flex time. And they are also still engaged primarily in a very much a language, arts, and social studies curriculum. For the high school, you have something that really is unique to Darien. I looked and searched and had a hard time finding something comparable that falls under the gifted umbrella. So it is really a unique opportunity within your 9th grade program. So you have an elective year-long class where it's a student elected focus. So going through these, and again, you have commendations, you also have considerations for every single section of the report. the identification process part, the program design piece, as well as the instruction component. But to pull some of the things that I did highlight some accommodations, and I also highlighted some of the considerations for the district to take. And so out of the highlights, I'm going to highlight some of the highlights, if you will. So for your commendations, you know, it's not up there, but I do want to say your families are super passionate about this program. Your students are super passionate about this program. So 90% of parents feel the program provides a safe environment for their students. And to accompany that, to kind of parallel that, approximately 93% of students felt that the program they were comfortable being there. That's not a small thing when it comes to gifted students, because traditionally speaking, research says that they can sometimes feel like they don't belong, whether it's because they feel like they are know-it-alls in their regular classrooms, or they feel like they're a little bit isolated. This has provided an opportunity. The fact that your community overwhelmingly feels that this program is meeting the needs of their students is definitely a commendation. And that your parents feel that way and the students feel that way was a beautiful mix. So for considerations, I wanted to highlight a few things, and I'm going to kind of do it by either overall or grade band, if you will. So one of the things is program-wide consideration I would like to highlight is to establish a district-wide stakeholder group that meets on a regular basis to inform your gifted program. You have a quasi version of this because the program director does meet with the DAG, but that's not encompassing the full stakeholder body that you would need to fall under what the standards for this would meet for the National Association for Gifted Children. So you need to have a more broadened stakeholder group that meets on a regular basis to kind of review the gifted program and making sure that it's measuring what you want to measure and that you're taking a closer look at it more often, with more frequency. For elementary, one of the things I'm going to highlight is the need to accelerate instruction in the area of mathematics. So this popped up over and over again. It popped up with parents. It was mentioned by teachers. But what I think really resonated as an evaluator is that the students brought it up. And the elementary students brought it up as, that was an area that they weren't struggling with, that was kind of easy for them. But the middle school students brought it up as something that they were very concerned with, because they felt like there was this giant this leap that they had to make from elementary to middle school, where it was way too easy in elementary school. Then they got to middle school and they were really kind of drowning in it, and it became the subject area that they were really struggling with. So somewhere in the middle, there should be some consideration for how do you meet that, whether it's curriculum compacting, which is probably the most successful way for you to do that within the elementary grade level without expanding too high, but that is a program consideration I think the district should look at. Another thing that popped up is this feeling that students other than just the identified students for gifted needed opportunities for enrichment. That was also something that resounded clearly with your stakeholders. They also wanted to see other subjects in place. So they wanted to see more science. They wanted to see, if by the time you added all the things that the kids wanted to see more of and that the teachers wanted to see more of, you'd have to create a completely different gifted program. And to be honest with you, your parents, your students love the program as it is. So you can meet those needs by actually creating more of an enrichment opportunity for all students. And I think that you also have an opportunity to mine then for talents in students that are not necessarily identified. Middle school, the consideration is to accommodate for full periods of gifted education learning. Feedback was overwhelming, couldn't miss it. Every stakeholder I talked to, it was probably the most common, beyond the math in elementary school, it was what surfaced the most for everyone, that the having it during lunch and the social implications, social emotional learning implications for students who are at an age where they desperately need to relearn how to socialize, having to divide their time was really something that was overwhelmingly discussed with all stakeholders. And so your high school achievers program, I touched on this slightly before, is really a unique opportunity. It really can be something that the district highlights as something, a state best practice. To get there, a consideration is to make sure that it's robust, that there's checks and balances, that there's measures. It's buried within the report and under the considerations under the high school though. It also, says that perhaps you can have a component where students are, they're already working with the mentor, but that if they have a component where there's a service learning piece to it, where they're connecting, because another thing that popped up for high school students is they wanted this to somehow reflect on their transcripts so they can actually use this on their college applications. A good way to do that is, obviously some service learning hours, or some community service hours, so that they're not just doing it for themselves, but there does need to be a global component to that. You don't, part of one of the standards for gifted students is that they're operating outside of just themselves, right? That you're contributing, that you're giving back, which also does nicely align with the district's new strategic plan and what the goals that you now have set for yourself as a district. So, without talking too fast, hopefully I wasn't talking too fast. Open for questions, discussions.
So thank you first of all. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Thank you first of all. I just remind the board that we haven't got the opportunity to. The comprehensive report has recommendations, accommodations for each section that will require a wee bit of pondering, because there are other ones that Teresa hasn't pointed out. But with that, Mr. Chairman, it's all yours.
Great. Teresa, thank you for the incredible amount of work and for the presentation. And thank you for being here this evening. So I'll open it up for some board questions or comments. Mrs. Barron.
Thank you. This was amazing. Thank you for the thoroughness, the detail level. I have stars, arrows, underlines. I love it. It's amazing. Curious going forward to you guys, what's the next steps? There are some really, really great things that we could be doing. How, when?
So the next steps for us, certainly administratively, but certainly like the board's take, right, and thoughts about it. But we would have the same process to ponder over the summer. What are the recommendations under each section? So for instance, there's recommendations here about elementary having dedicated spaces. Well, we know that we can deal with that because we sort of are through the building project. But there's other ones here that we have to ponder and what do they mean and do we agree with it? If not, we have to have a discussion here. If we do, how do we go about strategizing, addressing the recommendations essentially, and that would come through programmatic, come through the budget. That's kind of what we would have to do.
Good. Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie.
Thank you, Teresa. I mean, this for me is very exciting. Some of us on the board have been hoping for this for a while, and incredible amount of work and detail in this, and some of what I read in here is things that I experienced as a parent, and I'm excited to see how we can bring it to the next step. There's definitely, and I'm sure individual board members have different views on the information here, but there's things in here that I'm very passionate about and I'd like to see us put into practice, and specifically it's the mathematics, the elementary level, and eliminating the lunch component at the middle school, and maybe making Achievers something that everyone in the state can look to and then try to emulate, because I think it has the ability to become a program that's robust and we won't have significant drop off from 8th to 9th grade. There's going to be more passion and ownership in that 9th grade program. And that's, I think, if we want to have a 9th grade program, that's what we would like to see. And I just appreciate your work and everybody that has helped you with this project. It's amazing. I've read it through twice, but I'm sure I'm going to go through it again. There's a lot to talk about in here, but I'm very excited about where we can take this program going forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Mrs. Ochman?
I didn't raise my hand, I will.
I saw your hand before. So.
You know I will.
Go ahead, Mr. Seedy.
Thank you. In my short tenure on the board, I've picked up the fact that the 9th grade program has come under some scrutiny. And again, not to address tonight, but when I read through the report, that seemed to be the weakest link of the program. And maybe, if you have any initial comments, Alan, I welcome them, but I think longer term, I'd like to see, the justification for going forth with the 9th grade program, given the amount of options that the high school offers in terms of honors classes, AP classes, and beyond. So again, you don't have to go too deep tonight, but if you have any initial thoughts based on her
No,
findings.
because obviously along the way we've been getting updates and so on and so forth. And I think the reality of that program, the way it's described objectively by Teresa, is that if we're going to commit to it, it needs to be rigorous, and we need to think it through. We need to think through all the aspects of it. Whether they're going to have to commit to it in one capacity or another, there is a uniqueness to it. But there has to be a different level of rigor and curriculum and so on to it. If we're going to do it, that's what is before us. I'll have to ponder what that really means and how to bring that back to the board, but I also will obviously like the board's input on that too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. C. Mrs. Achman.
So thank you for the report. I would echo that we've had updates, but to me, the most profound part of this in some ways is the simplest part, that we're really looking at creating a gifted and talented program. And I think talent comes into play differently than twice exceptional, which is a gift in itself, or a gifted ability in a subject area. And being someone who has put achievers under scrutiny for the past few years, my concern has always been, I think that this is a program that there are many students who could benefit from, who have talents or need an opportunity to find enrichment differently. Really, it's an independent study in a lot of ways. And there are lots of kids who could benefit from that. So, I would really like to look at this robustly. I don't know still whether Achievers belongs in gifted and talented, or it belongs for kids who can show a demonstrated interest and a passion in something, and we want to encourage kids to go after that. I think that there's a lot of good there. And so this is really the first step in kind of recreating a framework for the program of gifted and talented. And thank you, because I think we have struggled to put words to it, and you did so very succinctly and very nicely. And that also speaks to the talent of our teachers, that kids and families are so happy with it. But I think, this report really gives us something to work with, and I appreciate that. The lunch at Middlesex has come up year after year after year. It's time, if we're having a new rotating schedule, maybe this is the perfect time to figure out how we can change that for kids. Does Achievers fall under gifted and talented, or does Achievers fall under passionate students, right? Like, that's what we're looking to embrace. So Teresa, thank you for organizing our thoughts. I love when people have underlined and arrowed and are excited about things, but I think this is a great first step, and I would love some recommendations prior to budget season, because I think sometimes when people feel that something they care about comes down to just dollars, the wrong impression or concern can come up. And I have not seen anyone on this board that doesn't care about students having opportunities for enrichment. We just want to make sure that we are doing the best we can by all students. So I'd love recommendations prior to budget season, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Achman. Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. One of the other things that stuck out to me plainly was the idea of differentiation, and there was a need or desire from students, teachers, parents across the board for more differentiation in the gen ed classroom. Is that something that you guys have thought about for next year? Is that planned in next year's PD, or is that something that would be another year out?
Yes, it's already planned, and it's also in goal 1 of the board strategic plan. So it's just coming in. It's good to see consistency, and helps make us certain that the goal is the right goal to have in the strategic plan.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Parent. Mrs. McCammon.
Teresa, thank you for the research and the consolidation. I was curious, as you were looking through, I know in your conclusions, you're balancing sort of programmatic solutions, and I guess what we use is the third use of the word inclusive, which would be included in the classroom. Can you talk about from a it looks like you're asking for a bit of a balance, a little bit of pull out and a little bit of just differentiation within the classroom. But can you just roll up to for us what your research recommends? And I'm particularly talking about the elementary school level. Thank you.
So there's, in all honesty, there's nothing wrong with a pull-out model or a model where you're pushing in, right? There, research says that, meta-analysis says that there are different, levels of appropriateness or effective rates, right, for either of those. So there's nothing wrong with a pull-out model. I think what parents surfaced as a concern and what kind of kept coming back as a concern when it came to that was really their overall question was what's happening when they're not, right, in the IDEA program. How are they being supported when they're not? And then looking at that, I would say that it kind of like with an IEP, right, where you have a student and some students actually might need more. One of the considerations that are there is that to identify students by their area of gift, and you're doing all these great assessments to identify students, but they're not actually being, it's not being differentiated even within the gifted curriculum, right? Everyone, if you're gifted, you go into the gifted classes and you're still getting the same gifted curriculum. So a consideration is to identify the student's individual gifts and areas of strength so that you can actually use that and balance that to leverage how much differentiation is needed or how much time even might be needed to really support a student. Because it is really a continuum of learning. And so that would be my suggestion. I look at balancing it by an individual student's need for gifted, for differentiation at a higher level. If that makes sense. Sorry.
Can I build on that? Yeah, thank you. Can you build on that? And then also you touched on twice exceptional differently, and I understand there is a process there, but if you're looking at a twice exceptional student, how do they fit within that sort of spectrum that you've identified?
Well, because technically you really need to be working together with your special education teacher, right? So if you have a twice exceptional student, you have to look at the whole child. So you need to address any gaps or anything that you need to help close that, but you also need to be able to enrich. And their area of disability might be in reading, yet they might be off the charts in another area, right? Whether it be art or whether it be math or so really there has to be a really close alignment, and that's what was articulated when I during my time with the teachers, is that there's a close articulation with the special education teacher along with the gifted teacher in order to make that blend so that students are getting what they need.
Thank you. Any other board questions or comments? Mrs. Ritchie.
I don't mean to be funny, but maybe we can consider changing the name as well, because IDEA can be confusing to people because it means two different things. So I think we should move in that direction as we move along in this process.
Anything you wanted to do to close out, Dr. Adams?
I just want to thank Teresa because, and I think the board has a good sense and have passed on also their appreciation, because once you go through it and you can see the comprehensive nature of it. I guess I'd ask the board, would you like to continue to discuss this at the retreat or the next board meeting, just to do another re-reflection on it? Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, I think we wanted to hear from Teresa and the great job that she did. I think, most all board members have read through it. I think organized some of their questions. I think the administration has heard some feedback from us, but I would keep it on the agenda so we could continue to discuss it, because I think there's some action items, and also start to hear what it looks like from a budget perspective as we go into the fall.
Okay. Thank you. Good. Teresa, right here ended the meeting. Congratulations on finishing up the program and also taking on this. This is not an easy task to take on with all the aspects associated with gifted education, and I thank you for it because it's going to be helpful to the kids especially. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I just want, in closing, I just want to say that I know that nothing crawls under people's skin more than having a stranger come into your home and pull everything up and check and see. And I have to tell you, every single stakeholder group that I worked with, students, parents, gifted teachers, administration, was warm, welcoming, honest. It really made what was a large task, a very easy task to do when you're in a place where people are really just very kind and willing to really extend for the best interests of kids. So congratulations on having such an amazing team and families that support you. So thank you very much. They made this a much easier process than it could have been otherwise. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the kind words.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Thank you. Moving along, Dr. Adley, update annual progress report on goals and objectives 2020, 2021.
So with your understanding, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You see the way it's formatted. We sort of build upon each of the particular seasons, December, March, and June. I would say that the board should feel these are board goals and working collaboratively together with administration. I think in the given year that we have had, given the amount of education our kids have received, some of the projects that we've done, I feel it was actually encouraging to do a wee bit of reflection on some of the things that we've actually achieved together and moving some of these initiatives forward. I'm just not going to go over all this with your understanding, but I'm certainly happy to comment on anything that's there. But I think for the most part, we have hit the goal. We've met the goals. Some of the time frames have fluctuated given the COVID and so on, but collaboratively we've got there and done some good work.
Any board questions or comments? Good. Mr. Sini.
Is there any area that you felt because of COVID, you felt a bit short relative to where you thought we could have been?
Because of COVID, I think just probably if Chris was here, I'd really focus on the teaching and learning aspect, right? Okay. Because that's the most important. The other stuff I think we were able to get done. Now we were able to get the teaching and learning, but that's the most important part, right? That was impacted in one way or the other, right? Or in different ways. So that's the one I would like. Yeah, it's the most important thing that we all do in the classroom instruction. The rest of it, we got to a good point in the buses, I guess, right?
No, still see,
So all of those things sort of took place regardless.
The facilities was easy. I shouldn't say easy, right. But it was a check mark.
Right. So we're able to complete those. It's always the teaching and learning for me is why we're here. And I think we should feel very good about what we did do. And again, the main thing that contributed towards that is having the kids in school. So the more we had the kids in school, the better off we were, basically.
Mrs. Ritchie.
Just under advanced teaching and learning, with the summer curriculum updates and revisions, as that starts to unfold, if the board could just hear a little bit more about what that includes and some examples, that would be helpful. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Moving along, discussion and possible action on proposed athletic field trips. Mr. Manfredonia.
Yes, hi, good evening, everybody. The set of field trips you see in front of you here are trips that the board has seen before. You might recall last year, the board did vote on and approve many, if not all, of these trips that you see in front of you today. However, because of COVID and the pandemic, none of them actually took place. So these trips are again placed in front of you for approval tonight. We rely on the fact that the district will be in a place where we will be able to send our students safely out to these various events. We also rely on the fact that they have to qualify for many of these events as well. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about any of the trips you have in front of you this evening.
So any questions or comments on the trips we have in front of us? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
7, 8, 9.
9. Any questions or thoughts? Mrs. Ritchie.
No, just a comment. Chris, thank you for this. I'm happy to see them again, and I hope that our students and athletes can participate because I know how meaningful all of these athletic competitions are to those athletes. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Can I make a motion to approve in a batch?
Yes, I'm fine with that. Motion to move forward with the 9 trips as presented by Mr. Manfredonia, second by Mr. Sini. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Manfredonia.
Yeah, so the second agenda item here for athletics involves the
I think we're good. Oh, the gift, sorry.
The gift, right, sorry.
The gift, I was like.
Athletics Part 2.
Still babbled. Thank
so
you.
Twice a year, the Blue Wave Booster Club will canvass our coaches and ask them what are the nice to haves in their athletic programs that's not provided by the Board of Ed. This you have in front of you are the requests from our fall and winter coaches. You have 2 requests here. One is for the girls basketball sign to be replaced. The signs you see, the games of the week that you see as you pull in High School Lane was just due to weather, with the grommets ripped off and needs to be replaced. The second request you have here is from the football team, a flip sled, which is a sled that actually helps with proper tackling technique and allows our athletes to use a sled versus using each other to perform that skill. You'll see in the probably late fall, early winter, the spring requests, which you remember seeing last year. So the requests you see here in front of you for the fall and the winter teams.
Thank you, Mr. Manfredonia. Questions or comments from the board?
Okay. May I have a motion to move forward with the gift from the Blue Wave Booster Club for the DHS varsity girls basketball sign and the DH varsity football flip sled? Mr. Maroney, second by Mrs. Achman. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Manfredonia, and thank you to the Blue Wave Booster Club for the ongoing generosity for providing this stuff for our student athletes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Deneen.
Thank you, Mr. Manfredonia.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Dr. Adley.
We will move forward with Mr. Rudel, annual report on donations.
So we've received over $350,000 in donations or gifts this year through the generosity of various organizations. Just some quick items to highlight. The Blue Wave Booster Club did donate a high school wrestling mat for over $8,600. 4 fans were donated for the gym at Holmes by the PTO. The story walk at Hindley was donated by the PTO. Corbin Cares donated a significant amount for staff meals. And then again, the Darien Foundation, the largest gift of $213,000 for the STEM robotics.
Then there's also donations accepted by the superintendent of principals attached to this report also.
So we did highlight some items that were donated that were below the threshold for the board, just so that they can see them. They range from some music equipment, such as a flute and a baritone horn, some visiting authors, some Adirondack chairs, some recess equipment, bike racks, indoor recess games and materials. All the various PTOs of the school did make donations to each of the schools.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Rudel. Again, incredible philanthropy and donations through a lot of great organizations that support our district, our students, our athletes, our theater, our music. It's incredible. So thank you for all these donations. Board questions or comments? Mrs. Achman.
I know on the robotics initiative, we had some questions about stipends and how that fit in with the contract. Where did we land on that?
Sure. We are going to go ahead with the volunteers, and if for the actual volunteers who actually participate, we'll support them through professional development with the funds. So it's a status. We're going the same way as we would normally do it with the clubs.
Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Achman.
And
go ahead, Mrs.
I
Achman.
had one other, and I don't know if Chris is still on or if I'm remembering correctly. Were the huddle cameras that were going to be installed a gift, a previous year's gift? I just don't remember where those are going to show up and when they're going to be implemented.
I have to ask Chris that question.
Are you still with us, Mr. Manfredonia?
You should have disappeared when the going was good, Mr. Manfredonia.
It's okay. It
Is he
doesn't
there?
need to hold us up tonight,
I
but if
think,
someone could get back
it's
to
a
me
good
on
point
huddle.
because the question has come up about were going to be installed, what they were going to be used for.
Sorry, I heard my name, but I didn't hear the question. I apologize.
Sorry, you almost got away. Chris, I can't remember, and my apologies. If the huddle cameras were a gift, and were they last year or this year, and when will they be installed?
So the huddle camera is not a gift. There's one installed in the gymnasium that we used quite a bit this past fall, winter, and spring for volleyball and basketball. The camera in the stadium was not installed this spring. They were not able to. There was not ready for lacrosse. Quite honestly, they didn't have the diagnostics to set it up for lacrosse, and they were only giving it to those schools who are offering spring football, which we were not offering. So we expect to have one this fall, but this one in the stadium was not installed this spring.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manfredoni. Okay, thank you, Mr. Rudel. Moving along, discussion on the May 2021 financial report and possible action on proposed budget transfers. Mr. Rudel.
So this is the financial report through May. We are forecasting a positive balance of $1,259,000. 1%. General education RCs make up a positive $422,000. Special education RCs make up a positive $750,000, with a little more than half of that being in excess cost reimbursement. And reopening expenditures are positive $85,000. COVID reopening expenditures stand at just over $3.6 million. We received grants of just under 1.1. There have been transfers of $840,000, and then the supplemental appropriation of 1.78 million, which leads us to the $85,000 positive. The changes in the reopening expenditures, a small adjustment in campus monitors, that's cancellation of the weekend cleaning contract, and we did have a resignation of one of our LPNs, so some salary savings associated with that. Overall, the forecast went from 1.1 million to 1.25 million. The large changes are adjustments in legal fees, health insurance, accumulated savings in some supplies, materials, travel, and dues accounts. We did have a resignation in the copy center, workers' compensation, some changes in utilities, special education tuition, campus monitor that I mentioned earlier, the COVID cleaning contract for the weekends, and then the LPN. Overall, salaries are forecast to be a positive 479,000. Interns remain positive at 46,000. Clubs and councils 17,000. Salary savings and turnover 314,000. Contract support better than expected non-certified contracts 48,000. And reopening expenditures are 52,000. Operating expenditures are a positive 439,000. Again, legal fees are a positive 126,000. Tuition reimbursement about 8,700. Supplies, materials, travel about 25,000. Special education transportation about 178,000. Special education tuition about 63,000, and then the COVID reopening expenditures of 32,000. Now, fixed expenses are a positive 55,000, really led by regular transportation of $32,000 in savings. Some small savings in property insurance, workers' comp, small projected $40,000 in utilities. Equipment is essentially flat at $298. $206 are related to technology equipment in the COVID account.
Hey, Rich, could you just make sure you speak up a little bit? I've got some people saying there. I know it's tough with the mask, but thank you.
Total revenue is a positive 284,000. This is largely led by excess cost, which we did receive a reimbursement rate of about 80%. So we did receive $374,000 above budget. Building rentals and field rentals are essentially a wash, and then ELP tuition is down about 91,000, and there are no transfers from month to month.
Thank you, Mr. Rudel. I'll open up to board questions or comments.
I'm sorry.
Mrs. Ackman.
Can we get a little more information on the long-term subs? We're up over $900,000.
Sure.
What's going on?
Sure. So we are over $900,000. A combination of that are employees who are covering for teachers or staff members that are currently getting paid, which goes against that initial budget of $475,000. We did have a number of teachers who took unpaid leave of absences. And so throughout the year, there have been budget adjustments or transfers that have taken the salary savings from those individual line items into long-term substitute accounts to account for that in the appropriate account.
Yes, go ahead, Mrs. Ackman. Sure.
Just a heads up to the finance committee, we usually take July off. I think we're going to try to meet. I followed up, as I said I would, with the superintendent, the finance director, and the chair, just to really understand. I think what's going on probably is some just differences in tracking now with trying to align to the chart of accounts. So we'll just kind of meet and come back to the board with observations, support, recommendations. So I will look to gather us, and I'm sorry to do it again to us, but I will
I
look
was
to
going to
gather
ask
us.
about it anyway.
Yeah.
'cause-
Yeah, and get it done.
So should I just hold my question that I was going to ask for Rich to give an overview of this breakout of accounts, or do you want
So
to?
Why don't we get together
Okay.
and do it, and then we can come back to the board with like a comprehensive understanding. I
Yeah,
think
we
that's the best way to go.
we have a comprehensive communication to go of what those changes were, so we're happy to
Okay,
present
good,
those.
because I think there needs more clarity for the board and for the public so that we're transparent as we move forward. in the budget
So,
process.
I'm sorry, so this is a finance committee meeting that we would gather the information at, be
No,
presented?
I think the takeaway from the last finance committee meeting was that we need we need a high level understanding from the administration as to what these changes are from a chart of account in terms of breaking out some of the lines. So I think the administration has agreed to provide that information just to get everyone on the same page.
Got it, so it's going to be presented either to the board or the finance committee? Okay.
We just felt, I think it's better to start at the finance committee meeting. They can dig into the details and ask the questions and then present it back up to the board.
But we're not having a July meeting, so when will we do that?
Well, I'm going to email you all.
Okay.
We're going to try to find a date.
Got it, yeah, okay, thank you, I
It will
lost
be
you there.
done before we close out our
Yes.
financials for the year.
Thank you, okay,
And just
got
to be
it.
clear, right now, we don't have a July or August meeting for finance
Not
committee, so
usually.
we're gonna schedule something.
Yeah.
Okay, great,
Which
thank you.
makes sense. Good, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Hockman. Thank you, Mr. Rudel. Any other questions or comments? Great, thank you. First reading and discussion on proposed schedule of the 2021-2022 regular Board of Ed meetings and subcommittee meetings. Dr. Adley.
Those are the dates.
There is a question.
February date, I believe, in there. And I just don't have mine in front of me, so I'm just looking at. Michelle, could you just scroll down a wee bit, please? And I think we included in there the subcommittee meetings too. I will say, I think that has been helpful to schedule subcommittee meetings because it sort of drives the work a little bit. So it's been helpful, certainly this year it has been. So we've listed some of those dates also for consideration.
Okay, so this is a first reading, no action this evening. Questions, Mrs. Ritchie?
Just on, with finance committee, it appears that the meetings are being held right before a regular board meeting, but then with facilities and policy, it seems like the meetings are taking place right after. And I just was wondering why, because then there'd be a gap in time before the next regular board meeting after the committee meeting. So I'm guessing that was done purposely, but curious.
Yeah, it was done purposely. I'd like to recall the reason why it was done purposely. I'll have to ask my assistant, Nadine.
Well, we
but I'll
usually
look
have
at it.
transfers, right?
Yeah, I'll look at that. I'll look at that.
The finance committee has to meet before.
Right.
I
Oh,
can't
yes.
speak to policy or facilities. You may have a reason, which.
It just
let
seems
us
like
know,
a
but
large,
finance has to.
the meetings tend to be right after our board meetings. And then there's like a week and a half until the next board meeting. So I'm
I'll
just
take a wee look
curious.
for the second reading.
I
of
just,
this.
it's not a big deal. I'm just curious why we had such a gap in.
Good question, thank you. Mrs. Perrin?
I'm going to strongly suggest that we reschedule that February 25th meeting and find another date, because meeting during Feb break,
Say that
Yeah,
again?
right.
not a great idea.
Right.
For the board
right,
meeting.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so we'll move on. Thank you. Moving on, action items, personal items, appointments, budget control positions, resignations, retirements. Ms. Sion.
I think maybe I'll defer to Mr. Rudel about budget control. We're continuing to hire and we still have a few people who are dribbling in with resignations and retirements.
So the change from the last month's enrollment, Oxbridge fourth grade did tip a section based on the current enrollment. So we are requesting 3 sections from budget control: Holmes third grade, Tokenique third grade, and Oxbridge fourth grade.
Okay. Mrs. Parent.
Can I ask a process question? It's my first year doing this. So we don't actually get our appropriation until July 1, right? So if we approve this tonight, is there a provisional something in the motion that says something to that effect?
Good question.
There-
Mr.
there-
Rudel is,
there
or
should be.
Mrs. Ahmed, yeah.
We can't
Subject-
spend money we don't have.
Right.
Yeah. So can we actually take action on this tonight? Subject to the
well-
appropriation July 1st. Mrs. Achman.
So my question would really be, it's highly unusual for the board too. I guess my question would be to Mrs. Sion, what does that do to your hiring?
So this year, there is a significant teacher shortage and we are losing teachers. I mean, I don't want to make it dire, but it's relatively dire. We're losing teachers every time we go out to interview to people who are moving along more quickly in the process. So if there's any way that you can do it contingent or otherwise, you would really help us out. We have 3 to interview with Dr. Adley.
So my suggestion might be that whatever the motion is allows for some sort of provision, assuming the appropriation is received in the full amount as of July 1, we are releasing budget control, which I think would allow you to enter at least into interviews, if not contracts.
So I would make a motion to release 3 sections of budget control, subject to the July 1st appropriation coming into place, allowing you to do the hiring that's needed to fill these positions.
Just throw a year on that, just so we're very clear of the fiscal
Thank you,
year.
Mr. Senior. Good. So a motion to move forward with 3 budget control positions for the 2021-2022 school year for Holmes 3rd grade, Tokenique 3rd grade, Oxford 4th grade, prior to the appropriation of July 1st, 2021. Mrs. Ritchie?
Just a process comment. I mean, typically so it's a little bit of cart before the horse. Typically, we set our sections in July. And we don't release budget control until we know exactly how many sections. So we're not at this point setting sections, but we are preemptively approving the use of budget control. So it's not how it's been done since I've been on the board. I'm okay with it because it sounds like with Marge, there's some urgency in terms of hiring. But I just wanted to make note of the fact that we haven't set sections and now and I, of course, want to use budget control and I'm in favor of that, but it's not how the process has been in the past. So I just want to make note of that.
Mrs. Achman?
Yeah, so I would second that. And I think we need to be careful of our language in the memo that we're offsetting. Like, I think right now we say that we're offsetting a section between Royal and Hindley. Well, that Hindley section is only 1 person away from breaking. I don't think we can offset until we actually set. And so I would just caution us, because this is so unusual to do it without setting sections, that we be careful in our language so no one thinks that their section is set, their number of sections is set. We kind of saw what happened with Oxbridge. Sometimes you end up over. And I would hate to kind of put that stress and worry on the public. We will set sections in July. So I think right now what we're doing is releasing funds so Mrs. Sion can go on an interview and have money to offer a contract. But I don't think we are setting, my understanding is we are not setting sections at this moment, because I'm not
That makes sense.
prepared to set sections.
It's basically as needed.
Yeah. Yeah. So the motion is to release funds from budget control to allow Marge Sion to do the hiring needed prior to the appropriation of July 1st. Is that second? Mr.
Wait,
Seen?
I'm sorry, can we just go back to the motion?
Yeah.
So how can we release funds when we don't have them? We don't have the funds until July 1st. So I'm
So
just.
can I make a suggestion?
Well, go ahead, Mrs. Achman.
Because I think what we are doing is assuming the full appropriation on July 1st, an immediate release of 3 sections of budget control for the purpose of hiring 3 teachers as indicated by the enrollment numbers.
Sounds good. Did you capture that, Mrs.
Say that again.
McCammon? Do I have a second?
How about I email it to you?
Okay.
Second on that, Mrs. Ritchie? All in favor? That's unanimous. All right, Mrs. McCammon? We'll follow up with an email, all right, Mrs. Sion? So you can move forward with that? Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for the conversation. PAR, anything there, Marge, other than approval? Motion to approve the PAR as presented. Mrs. Payne, second from Mrs. Ritchie, all in favor? Thank you. That is unanimous. We will move Michelle back to public comment.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participant's icon at the bottom of your you're unmuted for public comment. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all those listening and for all the comments this evening. Much appreciated. Have a good evening. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Ritchie, second by Mr. Sini. All those in favor?